Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Please take your seats. We're going to begin. I'd like to call this meeting into order. This is the regular meeting of the Land Use and Transportation Committee. I'm Supervisor Malia Cohen, chair of this committee, and to my right is Supervisor Scott Wiener, who is the vice chair of this committee. Joining us shortly will be Supervisor Jane Kim. Our clerk is Ms. Andrea Osbury. Also want to recognize Jesse Larson and Leo DeAssis, who will be televising this committee meeting for us on SFGov TV. Madam Clerk, do you have any announcements?
Yes, please silence all electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and copies of any documents to be included as part of the file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today may appear on a July 28th Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
All right, thank you very much. Could you please call item number 1?
Yes, item number 1 is an ordinance approving an agreement with the port for the city's purchase of Daggett Street between 16th and 7th Street.
All right, so colleagues, I've been notified by DPW that they need to conduct an additional public hearing on this item before we consider it. And after we take public comment on this item, I'll be making a motion to continue it. So could you please call, actually, why don't we go ahead and take public comment? Is there any members of the public that'd like to speak on item number 1? All right. Seeing no speakers, public comment is closed at this time. Is there anything you'd like to say, Supervisor Wiener? Excuse me, yes. It does need a continuance.
For how long?
September 14th.
Okay. I will make a motion to continue item 1 to the September 14th meeting.
All right. Thank you very much. This motion passes without objection. Madam Clerk, could you please call item 2?
Item number 2 is an ordinance amending the planning code to clarify the inclusionary affordable housing program applies to housing projects.
All right. Supervisor Kim is the author of this item, and she's not here yet. Why don't we acknowledge Supervisor Wiener?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, last week when this item was before us, I offered an amendment to adjust the AMI level for inclusionary housing applied to group housing to up to 90% of area median income instead of 55%, which would cover the higher end of low income and the lower end of moderate income. We have a massive gap in terms of our production of moderate income housing and even housing at the high end of low income. It's a major hole, and it seemed like it would make a lot of sense to allow for that somewhat higher AMI percentage for group housing. Before we introduced that amendment, we worked with the City Attorney's Office and were advised that we could do that. The City Attorney did not have as much time as the office normally has to review these things, and so shortly after the hearing, we were advised by the City Attorney's Office that under Prop C, we needed to keep it at 55%. And so I want to thank the City Attorney's Office for what it always does, is to do a continual review, and having received that new advice after the hearing, we will of course honor that advice. And so I'll be, after public comment, making a motion to retract the amendment that I proposed and that we adopted last week, so that we are in full compliance with Prop C. So that's what I will do after public comment.
Great, thank you very much. And after public comment, I'll be supporting that motion. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take public comment on item number 2. If there's any member of the public that'd like to speak on this item, please line up. You have 2 minutes. You'll hear a soft bell. Indicating that you'll have 30 seconds left.
Hi, my name is Kim Bostero, and I would imagine a lot of people aren't coming up here because of what just happened. And I was going to give you this to think about things. Now I'm going to give you this. I think it's a little celebration of a success. I'm a poet. Hollowed halls, click, clack, click, clack, click, clack. The echo of the heels of the one leaving. Tap, 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 tap. The keys of the computer from the one staying late. One going home to cook dinner for their children. the others staying late to fight for our rights. The sunshiny weekend means picnics for some, the cries of hunger and worse from others. Monday comes again, clack, click, clack, click, clack, click, the rush of the heels of many to continue the cycle of fighting for the freedom and justice for all. When do we go from the cycle of fighting and trying to the reality of success? Click, clack, click, clack to those hallowed halls of justice. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hello, my name is Catherine Wolf, and I'm the president of the Soma Resident Community Association. And I represent people who live in 4 buildings. They're TNDC buildings, and we have over 400 residents that we represent, from young kids all the way up to seniors. And affordable housing is something that is necessary for everybody. There's too much luxury housing being built, and therefore to have like group housing, for it to be excluded, for there not to be mandated that there be inclusionary housing, including group housing, is a disservice to all the residents of San Francisco, because there's a lot of people that are out there struggling. I myself was homeless at one point, and my son is homeless. My son is a vet. I know many, many people who are homeless or struggling to make it, or people who've lived in a little tiny SRO room for many, many years. And it is important that we build housing so, one, we can get the homeless off the street, so we can give them back their dignity, and also make it so that it's easier and for them to be able to turn things around quickly. Because you see me today, I'm the president of this association. I'm on disability. But 2.5 years ago, I was homeless. I had no home. And to be able to turn things around quickly, housing is so crucial. So I would impress upon you to please remember that we need to include housing for everybody, including those below the 30%, because there's a lot of us that are struggling to make it and can't do it without this. And we would all like to have our dignity back. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Alexandra Goldman. I'm a community planner with the Tenderloin Neighborhood Development Corporation. We're really happy today to find out that Supervisor Wiener's amendment is going to be withdrawn. We definitely didn't support that. In fact, a lot of people turned out today. Maybe everyone can just go like this to say that they support inclusionary the way it was written and the way that the city approved it. So we're really happy today that hopefully you're going to vote to apply the inclusionary ordinance to group housing just the way it was written. Many of us agree that there is a need for moderate income housing, but this is exactly the policy that the inclusionary dial is set to address. So once again, please, I hope that you will vote again this week to apply inclusionary ordinance to group housing, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
I just want to explain that I support the statements that were made by the previous speaker, who represents the same community where I'm from. And I also want to congratulate you on further maturing, realizing that the earlier proposal wasn't beneficial to the community. Also, I want to point out that your budget pertaining to health care is a pretty good outline, but the next target should be to include health care pertaining to dental programs for people that are economically disadvantaged and don't have coverage, because there's a lot of adolescents and adults that's having tooth decaying problems in all areas of the city. So the next budget proposal or allocation for funds for health care, I believe you should include that as well. I also want to step back off another topic too, pertaining to the finger pointing that's taking place with the sheriff's department. I want to point out that the sheriff kept that person that murdered that female, that bright skin colored female at Pier 14. Mercarimi is claiming that he's following constitutional law. Well, those charges were dropped against that individual that committed that crime, and after the charges was dropped, he's got till 12 o'clock midnight to release that inmate. That inmate was kept in the county jail for 2 weeks. So for him to say that he's following constitutional law and procedures with his own system, he violated his own rules and regulations. And as a result, that female ended up being murdered. It's disgusting. and it's causing a lot of hardship. And that sanctuary law, even though it means well, it's in violation of constitutional law of citizens who were born and raised in San Francisco by treating people who didn't come here illegally as if they got diplomatic immunity. It's not fair to us, and it surely wasn't fair to Kate Styling. So as a result, that needs to be withdrawn as well, too.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, and thank you for holding this hearing. I'm Sam Dennison with Faithful Fools, and I live and work in the Tenderloin. And I just want to say, one, I certainly support the inclusionary requirement for group housing, but I also want to say that the number of people who have showed up here today, the very discussions that have been prompted by the proposed amendment that Mr. Weiner offered, tells us really that the slice of the pie for affordable is too small. That when we talk about 12% being a set aside, it's too little. And then when you seek to raise the cap on that, really what it brings to bear is a kind of competition for a very small piece of the pie. Part of the larger conversation has to be how we do that higher end of affordable, how we do that middle end of affordable, and how we do low income. And that's a very nuanced conversation that I think has to happen in places other than a subcommittee of the Board of Supervisors. I want to thank each of you for your thoughtfulness on these issues because there's no easy answer no matter how we look at it. So your patience and your thoughtfulness, much appreciated. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Hi, good afternoon to everyone. And my name is Emmy Buenaventura, and I live in Tenderloin for 10 years. I'm a board member of Tenderloin Filipino American Community Association. I'm here today to support Supervisor Jane Kim proposal to include group housing to comply with the city's inclusionary ordinance, which says that all developers creating market rate housing must provide 12% of their units are prices affordable to household earnings, 55% of AMI. We believe that all market rate developers should contribute to affordable housing stability by ensuring that they comply with the inclusionary ordinance. I'm a senior and have health concerns, and I know that many low-income Filipinos who live in Soma, Tenderloin are being displaced because of lack of affordable housing. I am concerned about the proposal, Supervisor Weiner, to only provide affordable housing for households making 90% of area median income rather than the following city inclusionary ordinance. We find this proposal very alarming as it will set the precedent for developers to not comply with existing inclusionary ordinance. Many low-income people, seniors people with disabilities, working-class family will not be able to stay here in San Francisco. If market rate developers like group housing developers will provide
Thank you. Thank you. Your time is up. Thank you. Next speaker, please. Thank you. Ma'am, in the hat. Sir, can you... Yes. Come on. Come on. You're next. You're next. Could you help her out? Thank you.
I am Angelina Lero, a resident of Tenderloin for 20 years now and member of the Tenderloin Filipino American Community Association. First, I'd like to thank Supervisor Jane Kim for her proposal to ensure that all proposed housing should be subject to the same requirements as mandated in the inclusionary ordinance. I have lived at Alexander Residence at the NDC Senior Housing for 20 years. I wouldn't be living in San Francisco had it not been for the NDC's affordable housing. I am concerned that if the proposal by Supervisor Weiner is passed, this will add up to the affordable housing crisis in San Francisco. So, I urge Supervisor Weiner to reconsider his proposal and withdraw this amendment to increase the inclusionary housing to 90% of area median income, but instead support Supervisor Kim's proposal to ensure group housing compliance with existing inclusionary ordinance. Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Anthony Castro. I'm the Vice President of Soma Resident Council Association. And I'm really stressed because just by reading this, my hair fell. This basically is asking to these big companies that has the money and the funds and the resources to give more money, is saying to them, please, you have plenty. Don't give. Don't give because we're going to ask those who are struggling with the money to eat or to pay their real necessities that we all low class have, to them to have to give more. If our rent gets raised, we are not going to be able to survive. We're going to have to cut money from food, healthcare, or anything else just to be able to pay more rent. I mean, does that sound logic to anybody here? I don't think so. So please, vote on something that actually makes sense, because this doesn't make sense. Lots of those who are struggling to pay real things like cell phone, like food, and those who have the money to do, not to do it. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is James Pounders. I live in the Tenderloin, and most of my remarks are going to be directed to Scott Weiner because of what he was trying to do.
Sir, actually, your remarks have to be directed to everyone.
Okay, my remarks are directed to everyone then.
Okay.
I came to San Francisco and I had $35 in my pocket. I worked. I got out of the shelter and got into an SRO. Now I'm old, I'm disabled, and I'm poor. So at what point is it decided that at which conjuncture in my life that I should be sent from San Francisco because I can't live here anymore? We need housing. We need housing we can afford. We don't need to put more in that only people with money can afford. Thank you.
Next speaker, please. Come on, you guys know the rules. No applause. We got to keep this moving. We've got an aggressive agenda today. Show your spirit fingers. Let's see. All right, there it is. Please, next speaker.
Thank you. I'm Colleen Rebecca from St. Anthony Foundation. So I'm glad to hear about the city attorney's decision about the amendment, and that sounds like that this legislation will be going forward as originally written. I think that one of the reasons why this is an issue that's so important to us is because for St. Anthony's, we've been in the Tenderloin for 65 years. We have seen, I've been working at St. Anthony's for 10 years. Over the time, just my lifetime at St. Anthony's working there, when I started working, market rate small rooms without kitchens were actually affordable to our guests, people on SSI, people who were extremely low income. SSI right now is the maximum amount for a single person is $889 a month. That's around $10,600 some dollars a year. These types of rooms are no longer affordable to people on SSI, to people that are trying to exit homelessness at market rate. They used to be. It would be great if we could talk about ways that we can expand housing opportunities in this committee for folks that are at the very lowest end of income in our city. And I would love to be able to be a part of that discussion as we go forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, I'm Reginald Meadows, and I live in downtown. I've been living there for 40 years. As for the housing situation, this right here represents the 12%. And this right here represents the 88% of the housing that will go to other people who have more money than we do. I don't think our city should be put under such burdens like this by you guys who in many cases have been elected to your coming places to work. I think you should work for the benefit of all people. There are hardly any homes provided for those with lesser or lesser than usual salaries. What you are doing is forgetting the poor. Jesus said in the New Testament that the poor will be always with you. So if the poor be always with you, and you already know this, then why are you overlooking them so much? Yes, we would the city like to look pretty and have money. That's fine. But at what cost will you do this? The more you push in more of people who have more money, the less of the people who are living without money be able to stand. As they come in with higher buildings and higher prices, the poor will be pushed out. While you say this would not affect anyone, it affects everyone. Now, my proposal is that you build houses of 50% each. Build for them and build for us. The poor could need houses just like everybody else. So build houses for them too. No, not 12% in a building where people are paying way more rent than they need to. But housing actually that they can actually afford to live in. And then at the same time make housing for the other people also. That will be fair. If you want money, that's a fair move to go. If all you want is money, then you'll continue to push toward this. But God is looking at you.
Next speaker.
Hi, my name is Hi Carroll. I live in the Castro, and I'm a member of the Faithful Fools. I'd like to thank previous speakers for their comments, in particular Supervisor Wiener, Colleen from St. Anthony's, Sam Dennison from Faithful Fools, and Alexandra from TNDC. As I've observed this planning process over the spring, I've noticed it started out very adversarial, and then as the community spoke out, the community and neighbors in the Tenderloin came into relation with the developer, and I just was happy to see people coming and talking with each other, and I think we need more of that. So, taking into account the desires of the current residents of the neighborhood is, I think, really important, and that just generally we need more housing for everyone in San Francisco at all levels. And so thank you all for your work on that.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. David Elliott Lewis, 30-year resident of the city, activist with a number of tenant organizations, including Central City SRO Collaborative, Community Housing Partnership, and others. And I see San Francisco Neighborhood Network, of which we have another member here. Just a couple things. I'm grateful that Supervisor Wiener withdrew his amendment, but I think that the amendment and the one that Jane Kim and Avalos have put forward, which I totally support, I think brings up the larger issue. We have to not just look at, for inclusionary housing, percentage of units that are inclusionary, but we have to look at percentage of AMI. And 55% of AMI is good. Having inclusionary housing at 90% or 80% of AMI is not good. It's not really that inclusionary. And really that 12% on-site, or what is it, 15% off-site, it's a pretty low number. I know Jane Kim has been able to negotiate better for a couple of sites. We could do better as a city. We could be more inclusionary and have more on-site inclusionary housing with a lower AMI cutoff, no more than 55% of AMI. That will really help not just the middle class, but the working class in the city to at least have a chance at housing. I know it's not, poor people are still left out of this AMI equation, but at least people who are working class and poor might have a chance. As for extremely low-income housing, of course we need to do more than that. And we have, a housing trust fund that's $250 million and still unspent. Come on, it's time to release some of those funds for truly affordable low-income for people who fall into the extremely low-income housing category. We need to absolutely do more from them. And also figure out a transportation system that can support these additional people moving into our city with all this new construction. And I know that there's a supervisor here who has called for funding for transportation linked to housing. And
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Ryan Thayer. I'm a community organizer with TNDC. Just want to echo the sentiment of being happy that this amendment is being withdrawn. That is out of compliance with the voters' will back from Prop C in 2012. And just want to, put out a call too for y'all to really step it up in providing more housing for the people in the city, especially on the affordable scale. It's clear that people in the city are angry and they're upset, and we're prepared to fight, and we're going to take it again to this ballot this year, looking at the mission moratorium getting on the ballot within just a number of weeks, right, a number of days. People are prepared, right, and we're really clear that this is not what we need, and we need to close more loopholes around the lack of affordable housing in the city and the crisis that happens within people in this room, people in the Tenderloin, people in the low-income communities, the underserved communities. We need to house them, and we need to put more effort and more city ordinances and policies and ballot measures that support these efforts and support the people to stay here within San Francisco. And I also want to applaud and thank Jane Kim and Supervisor Avalos for working hard to actually do something about it. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Hi, my name is Gaya Taliaferro Tinmahan. I moved to San Francisco, the city of San Francisco, when I was 23 years old. And I would like to see the area mean income adjusted correctly and not use HUD numbers, but use San Francisco numbers. We do need different economic and income disparities in our communities. Otherwise, we're susceptible to the disparate impact that was recently passed by the Supreme Court. And also, it's microaggression if you don't make the housing available for people to have a place to move to if they're working and decent and are trying. It's microaggression if you don't allow it. I know that we can do it, San Francisco. We're a kind, diplomatic city. We are the headquarters for Star Trek, the Federation. We can do this. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, my name is LaTanya Jones, and I stand the mission. First of all, I want to thank you for retracting the amendment. And I stay in San Francisco in the SRO Hotel. And it's time for me to move on out of an SRO hotel. But how can I move out to an SRO hotel if I can't find an apartment that's affordable for myself? And I have a son that stays with me, but we can't afford the income that we have to move into another place because you have a range scale that we can't afford it. So please vote for that. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Carol Miller, and I'm speaking as a very low-income disabled senior on SSI and Section 8. And I want to speak about elevators for disabled seniors, okay? I have a heart condition, a ruptured mitral valve of the heart. I have taken care of myself, so I look healthy and everything, but I have a really hard time carrying heavy things up the stairs. So I need help with laundry and groceries. But I'm not, there's people way worse off than me, I found out, who are on waiting lists for years and years. I know of someone who needs oxygen all the time and has to have CPAP at night when they sleep. And there's frequently having emergencies and having to go to the hospital. They live in an SRO. They need a full-time live-in IHSS worker, but there's no way they can have one living in an SRO. And they have to this person has to rest on each floor when she's going up for a long time before she can continue. And so I found out, searching for a place with an elevator, that there's so many people way worse off than me. I have an IHSS worker who helps me when she can with carrying groceries up and doing laundry up and down the stairs and into the basement. But, I can't. I'd rather be independent and save the county money. I'd much rather do it myself with an elevator. But it doesn't work that way, and it's really an emergency for a lot of disabled low-income seniors who are way worse off than I am that need elevators. And it's only just waiting lists that move 2 or 3 a year, which, you know, you won't get on in your lifetime maybe, very possibly. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Test. Ethan Davidson here. So my name's Ethan Davidson. I have severe liver disease, and I need to stay in the city because my friends, my family, and my doctors and such, my medical support team is here. So a lot of people in the in the housing activist community have stopped using the word gentrification because to some people that connotates cleaner streets, safer streets, and most people are okay with that idea. But the trouble is that those things may happen, but the people currently living here will not get the benefit because they will be pushed out, and the current trend is to push them out into what I call slum suburbs, which is what they are. Suburbs that turn into slums are a terrible place for low-income people to live. Everything is so spread out, doctors, etc., scarce and spread out. So people a couple of years ago were moving to Berkeley and Oakland when they couldn't afford the city. Now the entire Bay Area is becoming unaffordable. And not just to poor disabled people, but even to like teachers, nurses, food servers, and people we all depend upon. People who lose their rent-controlled homes are forced to leave, in many cases, the entire Bay Area. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Diana Martinez. I work with the Mission SRO Collaborative, which is a program under Dolores Street Community Services. First of all, I find it fabulous that the proposed addendum was retracted. That was something really exciting. A really big win for the San Francisco community, so thank you for that. But while we're all here, we'd like to emphasize the importance of not just affordable housing, but also keeping protections in place for the currently existing residential hotels, the SROs. There are so many SRO residents who are currently facing fears of being evicted because there are so many that are kind of turning into an upgraded version of a dorm room, it seems. A lot of people are starting to get notices from their landlords about how architects will be coming in and about how they will be giving cash incentives for people to leave their rooms so that they can upgrade their residential hotels. There are many cases in which the tenants don't know their rights and they are forced to leave. There are cases where we see that the rent is being shot way up and that the landlord claims that they have some legal reason to do so because they hadn't made any rent increases recently. So it is very exciting that this addendum has been retracted, but since that has happened, we have to create more victories for protecting single-room occupancies in San Francisco and making this city, this sanctuary city, a more affordable place for our community to live. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Chirag Bhakta. I'm with the Mission SRO Collaborative, a part of Dolores Street Community Services. And I must say, I had to pinch myself earlier because I thought I was dreaming when I heard about the retraction of the amendment. Granted, it was a good dream, I'm not going to lie, but it is a thing unheard of, and I would like to thank the supervisor for that. But I think also the battle isn't won here. I hope it gets pushed on to the board and the full board approves, including group housing in the inclusionary ordinance. But on top of that, as my colleague who just spoke, Diana, talked about, it's not just new group housing that's coming up, it's the conversion of current SROs into group housing. We've seen them in the Mission, most notably with 20 Mission, which is a new group housing entity that has sprung up from an older existing SRO, and we fear that there are a few more SROs in the Mission that may be converted into this group housing, with rents being anywhere, that market rate, which would be at about $2,000 per room, which is completely not only unaffordable, it seems almost unreal. So thank you for that. Hopefully it gets passed on to the board with unanimous support, and hopefully it gets passed on by the board as well. And hopefully maybe this dream won't stop, and maybe we'll get some support for the Mission moratorium too. Thanks. Bye.
Next speaker.
Hi, my name is Hazel Rose. I'm a teacher. I was born and raised in San Francisco. I'm also an artist and speak on behalf of a bunch of my friends and community members. I also want to echo the last two speakers and thank you guys for attracting Weiners and Nendam. In full support of the Avalos and Kim Amendment. It's so important that we protect our inclusionary ordinances and SROs. As the area median income rises, I believe that it's our responsibility to direct our resources to protect our underserved communities, working class, low income, artist communities, before our city becomes unrecognizable, just catering to the ultra rich and tech communities. We're going to lose our culture if we aren't able to support those that have been here and take care of all the members of our community. So thank you.
Next speaker.
Hi, I'm Deborah Diefenbaugh with the Mission SRO Collaborative in the Hospitality House. I live in the Tenderloin and do outreach in the Mission District for approximately 6 years now. While in outreach, I have seen disabled veterans, seniors, single mothers with children, hardly making it. I've seen the hardships they've been through. I also live in an SRO in the Tenderloin. Let's see. Also, I believe that all housing should be equal, not just certain kind of housings. Housing is housing, and as we all know and seen, we desperately need housing and SROs in San Francisco, without the limitations put on people. We all love nice things, but we all also have to have a budget also. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Hi, my name is Jasmine Arroya, and I'm a resident of San Francisco District 10. I'm also the manager for the Mission SRO Collaborative at Dolores Strait Community Services. We first came here to ask to retract the amendment, so I want to thank you that was already retracted, but also to express the need that there is right now in the SROs to put a cap into the rent. SROs are now treated as free market, and what we are seeing is landlords increasing the rent to $1,500, $2,000, and putting families on the street. Some folks have shared that when you are coming out of college, you can easily get into an SRO because you don't mind using the bathroom downstairs, down the hall, even though you have the ability to have a roommate or rent another house. They have also transformed some SROs into tech dorms that also have a really high rent and is pushing out low-income families, low-income tenants, like was said before, veterans, single mothers that have used SROs as the source of residential low-income residents. So we really wanted to ask that you also think about current existing group homes that are being converted into tourist hotel, that are being converted into high-end dorms. There is a huge need for that. We have also came here many times and at the Board of Supervisors and offered to take supervisors on a tour to the hotels. So that still stands because I think it's important if you're going to be regulating the lives of the people that live at those places. It would be good if you could come and take a look and see what they go through on a daily basis. Thank you.
Next speaker.
I will be interpreted for the next speaker.
I'm sorry, could you tell me what your name is? Yeah, yours.
My name is Jadma Noronha.
Thank you. Please, continue.
Muy buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Araceli Lara. Soy trabajadora de alcance de los hoteles residenciales en el distrito de La Misión.
Good afternoon. My name is Araceli Lara, and I am an outreach worker at the hotels in a mission.
Y es mi primera vez que me siento tan contenta porque uno de los supervisores que casi nunca nos apoyan, ahora nos han apoyado y quiero decirle gracias, gracias, gracias por habernos apoyado a la comunidad. Nos sentimos muy apoyados de parte de usted este día.
And I can say that today is the first time that I feel supported by this supervisor for supporting the community. Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Today is one of the rare moments that I feel supported by you.
Y muchas gracias nuevamente y nada más quiero decirle que así como ahora nos ha apoyado, también queremos pedirle que no queremos que incrementen las rentas en los hoteles residenciales que están en muy malas condiciones y los invito a todos ustedes como supervisores que vayan a esas unidades, que vayan a esos hoteles para que se den cuenta en qué condiciones viven estas personas.
And I also want to urge the need to put a cap on the rent. The rent cannot be increased. The conditions of the SROs are horrible. And I also want to invite all of you to come to an SRO, take a look at the conditions where they live, what they go through every day, and how the landlords are increasing the rent.
Hemos tenido la dicha que varios supervisores nos han acompañado y los hemos visto llorar de tristeza, de ver cómo vive la comunidad en los hoteles residenciales. Y por eso me gustaría y hacerles énfasis de que vayan ustedes y se den cuenta en las condiciones tan deplorables que ellos viven.
And we have some supervisors that came with us and cried after seeing the conditions where the families were living. And I want to invite you, I want to urge you to come and see all the horrible conditions that the landlords keep the SRO hotels.
Por eso le digo muchas gracias y le digo que nos ayude para poderle ayudar a nuestra comunidad de que vive en los hoteles residenciales, porque es triste que nuestras comunidades en un hotel en un país tan rico y en San Francisco donde hay tanto dinero viva la gente tan mal.
And I want to ask you to help us supporting our community. It's unacceptable that in a country with so much money, in a city with so much money like San Francisco, there are still people living in a daily basis in these conditions. It's unacceptable.
Okay. Muchas gracias, supervisor. Es la primera vez que usted nos da un voto a nuestra comunidad. Que Dios lo bendiga.
Thank you, Supervisor. That's the first time that we give like a vote of support to our community. God bless you.
One thing before you leave, I just wanted to thank you for the invitation. I'll take you up on your invitation to visit Mission SRO. Before you leave, if you could stop by my office, we can schedule some time. Thank you. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Nada. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Julia. I'm with Hospitality House. I got to thank speak to everyone. I have to thank our supervisors for hearing the community and taking away the amendment as well as being open to visit SROs. That's awesome. What I think is kind of amazing is how packed this room gets anytime you even mention affordable housing. If that doesn't speak enough to why we need to make sure that any kind of housing being built in San Francisco has affordable units in it, I don't know what does. So I think it's pretty straightforward. Group housing, any kind of housing needs to have needs to comply with the inclusionary ordinance. I think it's a really straightforward ask. I want to urge all of you to support that, and when we get to the full board, to continue to support it and to continue fighting for affordable housing in San Francisco, because that's really what the community needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Wendy from Hospitality House. I just want to thank you again for taking back the amendment that you proposed last week. You know, sometimes affordable housing gets lost in the shuffle of everybody's interests, and neighborhoods are burdened with affordable housing on an unequal level. And 7 out of 11 districts here in the city the number has been raised of homeless people in the last year. That should tell you right there what's going on in the city. And who is responsible? We as all of these people in this room are responsible for affordable housing. And I also want to just thank Supervisor Kim and Avalos for introducing this group housing, because it gives a chance for folks that are able to come out of SROs into these group housing, and letting other folks go into these SROs that are sleeping on the streets. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hello, hi, I'm Samantha Rogers, also from Hospitality House. I'm speaking on behalf of everything that's going on from San Francisco. I became here to get my life together, but I can no longer stay here and afford to stay here because of the high price of the rent. I commute back and forth weekly from Stockton, California to San Francisco. This is where I got my life at. This is where everything started. And it hurts me to know that this place is always helpful in every aspect in my life, and all the other people that's out here suffering and going through things. And I'm not understanding how come we can't have lower income what manages our lives. Having 2 and 3 jobs just to be able to stay afloat in San Francisco. We working ourselves to death to try to build our community back. As I walk to work at 4 o'clock in the morning, this whole street of Market Street from Van Ness down here to the Tenderloin is covered with homeless people. Please come outside at that time and I didn't take a look how San Francisco is being destroyed. We need lower income housing, and we need y'all to back us up to make that happen. Have a good day.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. I am Rosalia Tuvera, a resident of the Tenderloin for 15 years now, and a board member of the Tenderloin Filipino-American Community Association. I have lived in Alexander residence, attend DC senior housing for 15 years now, and I would be living in San Francisco had not been for the TNDC's affordable housing. I'm here to thank, and our association too is very, very thankful to Supervisor Jin Kim's proposal, which makes group housing subject to the same requirements as any other form of housing. And I'm happy that the Supervisor Weiner amendments have been withdrawn. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Gloria Berry. I'm a native, born and raised here in San Francisco. I graduated from Presentation All-Girls School. I'm a veteran, 10 years active duty, 2 years reserve in the Navy, and 1 year Army National Guard. I have 8 years of prior law enforcement. Right now, I am chronically ill. I have multiple appointments at the Cancer Center, at the Veterans Hospital, San Francisco. I lost my house in 2012. I've been homeless for 3 years. After begging and begging Swords to Plowshares for weeks to assist me in their homeless program, I was repetitively told no. After I reported to them, well, higher up than them, that they do not help homeless women, I was accepted in the program the next day. I was then told that they would help me find housing here in San Francisco. I was told about the HUD-VASH program. I was repetitively told no because I do not score high enough, because I answered no to all the drug questions. If I had drug problems, I would have qualified for the program. So again, I reported this to someone higher, the Director of Social Services, and I got a call the next day, and I got approved for HUD-VASH. Now that I have that, I still cannot find anywhere to live in San Francisco. I'm repetitively told that I need to live in some SROs where some of the behaviors is not something I am used to. If you raise the rent for these places, it's going to be more white male San Francisco dominance and not people that look like me. Not everybody who needs housing is of the stereotype that...
Thank you for sharing your story.
Good afternoon, Board of Supervisors. My name is Kevin Mann, and I work as a community advocacy for the Faithful Fools Street Ministry with the Faithful Fools and Market Street for the Masses. We at the Faithful Fools have been fighting for social justice on the corner of Hyde and Turk in the Tenderloin for over 17 years. We are here today in support of the Avalos Kim Inclusionary Group Housing Amendment to the city's 2002 affordable housing legislation, targeting the original 55% AMI critical to supporting the most at-risk and vulnerable populations in our city. San Francisco's housing crisis is causing rapid rent increases, unprecedented evictions and displacements, especially among lower-income families, small businesses, people of color, homeless LGBT youth, artists, activists, and nonprofit communities. Without applying the inclusionary group housing, targeting those at 55%, developers will continue to leverage loopholes that further accelerate our crisis of development. So I'm asking you to close this loophole, back the Avalos Kim legislation, and clarify for the people on the margins of our city that in these times of rapid change, we will need bold leadership willing to stand on the side of the poor that is too often forgotten in this city. None of us can afford the continuing skyrocketing housing and living expenses anymore. Let's pass this inclusionary group housing and match the spirit of the law with the intent of the law for a visionary San Francisco where working class people can afford to survive, for people from all walks of life, for a quality of living that we can pass on to future generations and be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
That young man's going to be running for office one day soon. My name is Joe Wilson. I'm representing Hospitality House. I want to acknowledge the supervisors, particularly Supervisor Weiner and Cohen, for withdrawing the amendment to the amendment, the inclusionary ordinance. I want to urge full support of the Avalos Kim amendment to the inclusionary ordinance. I think anything that we can do to decelerate the widening gap between the housing that we produce and the housing that we lose is a good thing to do. A couple of numbers just to throw out. Information recently released by the Department of the Human Services Agency, 236,000 people in San Francisco are living at 200% of the federal poverty level or below. That is $23,000 a year. The per capita income in Visitation Valley is $17,000 a year. The per capita income in Bayview Hunters Point is $20,000 a year. The per capita income in Civic Center downtown area, $24,000 a year. Everything that we should be about at this board should be about decreasing that gap and making sure that lower income working class communities of color who are under assault in our city are receiving all of the support that we can give them, and passing laws to make sure that developers have to respect the fact that it is child care workers, it is public school teachers, it is hotel and restaurant employees, it is nonprofit employees that this city is about. Those are the people that we need to represent on this body. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Supervisor Kim, Cohen, and Weiner, thank you, and to the audience and to the public at home. My name is Daniel Landry. I'm a long-term resident, certificate of preference holder out of the Fillmore Western Addition area. And I rise today, first of all, to say that I stand with all those who's fighting for affordable housing and all those who's been displaced and impacted by a former redevelopment project, as well as some of the struggles that's going on in our Mission District today. We stand with the Latino community, and I think it's clear that we got to start thinking out of the box. I just wanted to come up and share something about this housing, because a lot of times I come down here, I deal with a lot of police issues, but it just is upon me to say something. I think San Francisco need to kind of think out of the box, because I've been coming up here for 20 some odd years, and I remember talking to President Matt Gonzalez one time about some of the things that the state is not doing. The state of California it seems to not take a strong stance when it comes to housing. You know, I don't know what grade to give our Governor Brown, but I can say we got to think out of the box and look beyond. Because San Francisco is always interested in other lands. I mean, hell, we own half of the airport, right? We own other parts of this state when it comes to Hetch Hetchy and dealing with our water. Let's look out the box and also preserve what's already on the books. Because as you know, and I mentioned Board President Matt Gonzalez, your reality is you're a supervisor, you're here, but then you're gone, whether you term out after 8 years. But San Francisco continues to go in circles, and we continue to have to repeat these conversations over and over again. And I'm a victim, and my mother was displaced twice by the redevelopment agency, so I think I kind of know something about housing and what's the next steps. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Yes. Hello, my name is Moses Thompson. I'm in a hospitality house attendee. I'll make this short and sweet. This would, this would set offer precedents, and would move us toward eliminating affordability altogether. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Tess Davis. I'm a housing case manager at Hospitality House. I'm here today to stand in solidarity with everyone who's asking for more affordable housing in San Francisco. It's obviously a really important issue. You can see a lot of people here speaking from their hearts and very emotionally. It impacts me personally because I was displaced from San Francisco and I live in Oakland now, and I really hate to be doing the same thing in Oakland as what's happening here. It's really frustrating and cyclical process, but I wanted to thank you, Supervisor Weiner and Cohen, for moving your amendment, and I wanted to thank Avalos and Kim very much for the closing the loophole amendment. I think it's really, really important, and I really appreciate you introducing it.
Thank you.
Chairperson Cohen, supervisors, my name is David Sincata, and I'm here on behalf of Forge Land Company. The project I represent actually got approved by the Planning Commission on July 9th for 231 group housing units. And we're really proud and pleased to be probably the first project that will utilize this legislation for BMR units. And the reason I'm here today is there's another amendment in this code that deals with Section 140 of the Planning Code dealing with exposure. And it's not clear whether or not that provision will apply to this project. If it does apply to this project, it would therefore make the project impossible to build. So it's based on the project itself is 2 vacant surface parking lots and not displacing anyone and creating about 231 group housing units. I haven't been able to get clarification on this from the deputy city attorney or the zoning administrator, and so I'm raising the issue that the amendments that are possible that you've already proposed for Section 307M, which allows the zoning administrator to grant exceptions, be broadened just a little bit further to allow that any project that is approved prior to the adoption of this legislation can be exempted by the zoning administrator. I can tell you we've had 7 different property owners adjacent to this site and that we reached agreements with in order to allow this project to go forward. And we all had to deal with certain compromises on setbacks and try to make this project work. It is new housing, not displacing anyone, and it will be providing the BMR units that are required under this legislation. I urge you to, I'd be available to talk about this at other times or after this hearing.
Supervisor.
Thank you. So this is the first time I've heard of this issue. It would have been good to bring this up prior with our office. So in the meantime, I do see members of the planning department here. If you could just confer with them on the answer to your question, that would be great. Thank you.
I have been talking to them. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Supervisor Wiener, I'm glad to hear that this amendment has been withdrawn. That notwithstanding, I'm very concerned about the trend here in the city towards smaller units for more money. The very first thing we need to do is protect tenants in their current homes. We need to somehow get rid of no-fault evictions, and I know that's going to be state legislation. And in addition, we need to start pressuring communities where the jobs are located to start building the workforce housing so that we don't have all this pressure here in San Francisco. And again, I'm very glad that this group housing will be subject to inclusionary housing requirements. Again, I'm very concerned about this trend towards lowering the quality of the housing but charging more. That's a very disturbing trend. And I just want to note that those of us who live in rent-controlled housing, we're all so nervous about the no-fault eviction notice that we could get any time. We have no idea because we know that where we're living, it's just so valuable. Speculators could make so much more money. Not only would we be forced into lower quality housing, but we'd have to dip into our retirement accounts to pay for that housing. This is where a friend of mine lived. She got a no-fault eviction, and she is now, this place is on the market for $700,000. And she now lives in a trailer park in Novato. She was evicted. It was an Ellis Act eviction in 2009. And none of us want that to happen to us. Thanks.
My name's Kat Calloway. I'm a resident of the Tenderloin. And I'd like for y'all to consider two things that disturb me. Last week I overheard what we'll call a speculator's staff laughing about what their next loophole was going to be. And then their next point was that the BMRs can be filled with their relatives until the city quits monitoring. That's a sad statement. Also, I'd like to ask that you look at the current housing that's been developed in Market Street and consider the vacancy rates. They're not good. They're empty. So I think you need to look at the impact of what's already been done and why do more. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. I'm Patrick Manette Shaw on personal time. I understand this ordinance will require developers of group housing projects to be subject to the requirements of building 12 to 15% affordable units on site or have to pay the various inclusionary housing fees. So I commend you for this ordinance. Since the inclusionary fee legislation was first implemented, over $170 million in fees have been paid by developers into the several inclusionary fee fund accounts. This committee needs to rapidly hold a hearing on what the Mayor's Office of Housing, MOHCD, has spent that $170 million on, and if not yet spent, MOHCD should be asked what they're doing with that money and what the delay is. San Franciscans desperately need the Board of Supes to offer and place a city charter change on the ballot to create a board or commission in charge of total oversight of the entire MOHCD. It is not good enough that there's an oversight body only to the successor agency to the redevelopment agency. What is MOHCD doing with the Housing Trust Fund, the separate affordable housing fund, and the hundreds of millions that have been collected from inclusionary housing fees that have been collected to date? Show us the money.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that'd like to speak on this item? All right, seeing none, public comment is closed at this particular time. Supervisor Kim has a few remarks.
Thank you, Chair Cohen, and also to Supervisor Weiner. I appreciate the time that was spent over the last week on the amendment that was proposed at committee, and I'm glad to see that we are now going back to the original language of the group housing ordinance. Again, I just want to thank all the members of the public that came out here to organize for today's meeting. We really wanted to ensure that the inclusionary housing program, which was first passed by the board in 2002, included group housing. In fact, it explicitly and expressly said that group housing developers would be providing affordable housing under this ordinance. However, because of wording languages around dwelling units, it hadn't been applied yet, in large part because we hadn't seen a lot of market rate SRO type of developments come before the board. The market is so hot now that even these micro units are suddenly financeable and are actually being produced. We have 3 in the district that I represent, 1178 Folsom Street, which is 42 units of micro units at 290 to 350 square feet. And of course, one that impacts many of the residents that came out today, 145 Turk and 361 Leavenworth, which is 238 units of apartments that are roughly 250 square feet as well. We're finding that many of these units are currently going at 90% average median income, which are folks that are middle income. But we want to ensure that these developers are providing what every other developer in the city provides, which is 12% on-site at 55% of AMI below. Now, again, as many of you mentioned, this is still far above the income of many of our residents in the Tenderloin, which is roughly at close to $40,000 a year for a person of one. But we do want to ensure that this is being provided equitably. If we want to talk about increasing the AMI of on-site affordable housing, then we should do that through the long-term process of amending our inclusionary housing ordinance, which we are currently discussing through a program called the DIAL, which is you may provide units at 90% AMI, but then you have to provide more of them because you're not as deeply subsidizing those units on site. Or perhaps you'll dial down and provide fewer units but at a lower AMI because it's at a deeper subsidy, thereby maybe hitting some of the residents that are here in this room. I also want to acknowledge that some of you talked about some of the issues that we're seeing in our SRO hotels, not just new ones, but ones that currently exist. The elevator issue, many of the conditions. Our office, and I heard Supervisor Cohen express this as well, is very interested in working on this and continuing on it. Over 50% of all the SRO buildings are in District 6. In fact, that's part of our housing balance report, which we'll be hearing next Monday. And so that conversation will also happen next week, and I really encourage many of you to come out and hear that report. But without further, I want to thank again Central City SRO Collaborative, the Tenderloin Filipino Community Association, the SOMA TNDC Residents Council, Hospitality House, and Faithful Fools, and Mission SRO Collaborative for coming out to speak today. I know there's many others, but I know some of these groups really did organize today, and I'm glad that we will be putting this forward to the full board tomorrow. So I'll be making a motion. Oh, I'm sorry, we should make a motion on the amendment, and I believe Supervisor Weiner will do that, and then I'll make a motion on the full ordinance.
Thank you very much. Supervisor Weiner.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the members of the public who came out today. I think largely a terrific representation from the Tenderloin neighborhood, and it's always great to see when a neighborhood really organizes, even if you agree on this issue or disagree on that issue. It's really it's inspiring when a neighborhood comes together and organizes and comes out and represents. And I'll be supporting as I mentioned when I'm finished with my remarks today, I will make a motion to withdraw the amendment that we had adopted last week, and then I'll be supporting this legislation today with a positive recommendation. I do just, however, want to address an issue that not every commenter made, but I think some of the commenters made. And I think if you didn't know anything about this ordinance and you just sort of showed up today and listened, you might get the inaccurate perception that the amendment that I offered last week that raised the maximum area median income for inclusionary housing for group income from 55 to 90% at the most, that was taking the units out of the affordable category and somehow putting them into the non-affordable category, even taking it out of the below market rate affordable category entirely. And that is completely and entirely inaccurate. Our inclusionary program goes from 0 to 120% of AMI. It includes very low income, and moderate income. 90% is at the low end of moderate income. And what we're talking here, when you go between 55% and 90%, even though some of the commenters were implying that was somehow moving into some sort of luxurious category, that is the higher end of low income and the lower end of moderate income. And just to put it into dollar terms, that is, we're talking about an annual salary of between $45,000 and $65,000 a year. Now, in many parts of the United States, you're doing just fine if you're making between $45,000 and $65,000 a year. You can survive, you can raise a family. That's a much more challenging income range in San Francisco. And so many of the people that I know, people that I represent, people that I have talked to in this city who are struggling with housing, who are hanging on by their fingernails, who know that if they get evicted or lose their housing, they're done. They're going to struggle to stay in this city, let alone in their neighborhood. They are in that range. Let's talk about who is in that 45,000 to 65,000 range. In other words, that 55% to 90% of AMI that some people were disparaging today as not really in need of affordable housing. Those are teachers. We heard reference to teachers today. Those are teachers in that category. In fact, teachers make, on average, a little bit above that range. So this is the low end of teacher salaries, starting teachers. Social workers fall into that category. Lab technicians in our medical centers fall into that category. Paralegals fall in that category. Not RNs, LPNs fall into that category. Office managers fall into this category. So I think it's very important when we're choosing the language that we use, not to just say, well, you went above the 55%, well, you're taking this out of affordable housing, this is no longer affordable, this is for rich tech workers or whatever else people sometimes say. This is about our teachers and our social workers and our lab technicians and our paralegals and our LPMs and our office managers who are also struggling mightily to stay in this city. That is who we are talking about. And right now, we are not building housing for those people. We're not building enough low-income housing, and I have been supportive of enormous amounts of funding for low-income housing. We are not building enough, and we need to build more. But we are hardly building anything for this income range. And we have to do better. We have to build more for this high end of low income and for our moderate income residents, because right now we're just not doing anything for them. So I just wanted to really put that out there, because this income level, this matters. It is theoretically part of our affordable housing program. We're just building a very, very small amount of housing that they can actually afford. We need more low-income housing, and we need more moderate-income housing. And so, and every time I have raised, being on the board almost 5 years now, the concept of moderate-income housing, there's a lot of lip service that gets paid in this building to moderate-income housing, and not a lot happens. I know that there are some projects in process now that will contain some moderate-income housing, but when you add up the number of units, it is a drop in the bucket compared to what we need for this income range. I just wanted to make sure to put that out there, because I think there was a lot of caricature that was going on over the last week about the amendment that I offered, that having the gall to even suggest that we should be building in that 55% of AMI to 90% of AMI range somehow meant it's not affordable housing, or it's not part of the BMR program, and so forth. And that is just not the case. And I understand there's a lot of political rhetoric in this building and in this town, but it's important to look at the actual facts. I also just want to say that as I mentioned at the beginning, it's great that the Tenderloin community has really rallied and organized around the particular one or I guess two group housing projects that are being built in the Tenderloin. I'm a big believer in communities organizing around the housing that's getting built in their neighborhoods, and we've certainly seen that in my district, in the Upper Market area, and it's very, very important. This legislation is not limited to the Tenderloin. It is for the whole city. And so I understand that it's important to be organizing around these projects, but this legislation isn't just about one or two projects. It's not just about one period of time. This is for the whole city for the long run. And so it's important that we get it right, and it's important that we have candid discussions around these issues, including affordable housing for all income levels. So with that, Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion to withdraw the amendment that I had proposed and that we adopted last week. And then once we do that, I will be supporting, I assume that Supervisor Kim will make a motion to forward with recommendation, and I'll support that motion.
Thank you, Supervisor Wiener. Appreciate you for clearing up a few of the misconceptions that are out there. A motion has been made, and it looks like a motion has been made to withdraw the amendment. Without objection, let's accept that motion. All right, without objection, this motion passes. Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. I just wanted to say a couple of things. First of all, in response to Supervisor Wiener, we all know that we need to build housing at every single income category, and that it's not helpful when we are pitted against the very low income versus low and, of course, middle class residents. Couple of things I will say about that. I just want to remind members of this committee, a lot of the residents that are here in this room are on fixed income. They are living day by day from GA and Social Security. That's anywhere between $400 to $800 a month. So when you tell them that people at 90% of AMI who make, in 2015, $64,200 a year, it's hard to tell them that they are also hanging by a thread. The people in this room are really hanging by a thread. And it's not to say that people that make 90% AMI aren't struggling. They are. It is hard to live in the city and make anywhere between $40,000 to $60,000 a year. I mean, that's the income range that we're talking about when we talk about on-site inclusionary housing. But I just think it's careful. We should remember the audience that we are speaking to, and these are the folks that are really, really hanging by a thread. And that's why we prioritize this type of housing. And when we talk about group housing legislation impacting the entire city, well, all the group housing projects are in my district. And so, I mean, in many ways, it feels like a D6 policy. The second thing I'll say around micro units, which was another legislation that was passed, a lot of the areas that are zoned and therefore eligible for group housing is also in the district that I represent. It's not in other parts of the city, which tend to be more residential housing, single-family housing, and larger apartment buildings. So just a couple of things there. That being said, I still do support us building housing at every income level. I know that Supervisor Cohen in my district, D6 and D10, over the last 10 years produced 60% of all middle-income units for the city of San Francisco. 60% of all middle-income units were built in D6 and D10. And when we look at the pipeline for what's permitted into the future, 382 units out of the 552 middle-income units are also being proposed in the district that I represent. I absolutely believe in middle-income housing. It's something that I know many of our affordable housing advocates and myself fought for. For example, in the Giant Seal with CO Lot 337, where almost 30% of that housing will be for individuals making between 90 and 150% of AMI. These are the nurses and teachers and social workers that we were talking about. But I do think that there is some real struggle that people are hearing in this room, and that's why they spoke the way that they did. And many of the people that were here advocating for 55% of AMI will not even be eligible for those units. I mean, in many ways, they're probably advocating for many of the social workers that are here that are providing them those types of services to be able to live in the neighborhood. As an organizer, I never made more than $40,000 a year here in San Francisco, and so this would be the type of unit that many of our organizers will be eligible for. So I'd like to make a motion to move this item forward with recommendation as a committee report for tomorrow's full board meeting.
All right, thank you. Motion made by Supervisor Kim, and without objection, this motion moves forward as a committee report. Thank you. All right, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, as you transition, please try to keep your voices down as you leave the chamber. Madam Clerk, could you please call items 3 and 4 together?
Yes, item number 3 is a resolution approving disposition and development agreement by successor agency to MA West LLC for a purchase of $172.5 million for a parcel known as Trans Bay Block 5. And item number 4 is a resolution approving a disposition and development agreement by successor agency to Trans Bay 8 Urban Housing LLC for a purchase price of $71 million for a parcel known as Trans Bay Block 8.
All right, thank you so much. Supervisor Kim is the author of items 3 and 4, and she's going to make a few opening remarks.
Thank you. These two items before us are a continuation of the sales of our blocks on Transbay, which helped to go fund the construction of the terminal, which, as many of our residents have probably noticed, have finally gone from below ground, and we're finally erecting vertical. It's actually really exciting to see the skeleton of what will be the terminus for downtown Caltrain and high-speed rail, fingers crossed, into the future. As many of you know, our successor agency, OCII, is required to sell these blocks to generate the sale proceeds, as I had mentioned. The Transbay redevelopment plan requires that the board approve the disposition of the Transbay parcels as OCII sells them, consistent with Section 33433 of the Community Redevelopment Law. OCII has entered into disposition and development agreements with Block 5 and Block 8 development teams, which were each competitively selected through an RFP process. And the board's approval of these disposition is the final step. One of the blocks, Block 5, is all office space, and we'll be contributing to our fees program, including $18.6 million for a jobs housing linkage fee that goes directly into our affordable housing program, often for our lowest income, and $10.8 million in transit fees. We also have a joint venture on Transbay Block 8, which will be a mix of affordable and market rate housing, which will contribute eventually to the 35% of affordability that will be required in the Transbay redevelopment area plan, 25% for low and moderate income, another 10% for middle class income, the types of neighborhoods that we would really like to see more of being built throughout San Francisco. So I know that we have a brief presentation by OCII, and I believe Shane Hart, the project manager, will be speaking on these two items.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim, Chair Cohen. Supervisor Weiner, thank you very much. My name is Shane Hart, and I am the Transbay Project Manager with Office of Community Investment and Infrastructure. I have a very brief presentation. I'm going to present both Block 5 and Block 8 at the same time. I'm going to start with Block 5. It's located in the northeast corner of Howard and Beale Streets. This map shows the parcels that are involved. The larger parcel is parcel N1, and that is the parcel that will actually be sold to MA West, which is the developer. The other two parcels are open space parcels. The next slide is a rendering of the office building, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. The purchase price is $172.5 million, proceeds all of which go towards the construction of the transit center, and the closing date is September 16, 2015. The project consists of 766,745 gross square feet of office space and a 43-story tower. There's about 8,642 square feet of ground floor retail space. and about 24,000 square feet of public open space. They plan to start construction in December of 2016, and they are required to complete construction within 39 months of commencement. As Supervisor Kim mentioned, the developer will be paying impact fees, job housing linkage fee, $18.6 million, and then the transit impact fee is almost $11 million. Block 8 is located on Folsom Street between First and Fremont. This is a rendering of the building. This one is residential, and it consists of a tower building plus 2 podiums located adjacent to the east. Here's a site plan.
We just called 3 and 4.
The purchase price is $71 million. Again, all the funds go towards the construction of the transit center, and the close date is October 1st of 2015. It's 554 total units, of which 404 are market rate, and those are split into 124 for sale and 280 rentals. There will also be 150 affordable units, of which 70 will be inclusionary. Those are developer funded and will be affordable to households earning up to 40 and 50% of AMI. And then the other 80 affordable units will be funded by OCII, and those will be affordable to households earning up to 50% of AMI. Also be 18,000 square feet of retail space, 6,500 square feet of public open space. They plan to start construction in September of 2016, and per the DDA must complete construction within 42 months of commencement. If you have any questions, I do have developer reps here, as well as Tim Kelly from KMA.
Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for your presentation. Quick and to the point. Supervisor Kim, I don't know if you had any remarks. Okay, seeing none, I think we'll go to public comment now for items 3 and 4. If there's any members of the public that'd like to speak on this item, please come up to the podium. Just as a reminder, you'll have 2 minutes. Okay, seeing no public comment is closed at this time. Supervisor Kim.
So I'd like to make a motion to move forward items 3 and 4 with recommendation to the full board.
Okay. All right. Without objection, that motion passes with a positive recommendation. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Could you please call items number 5 and 6 together?
Yes, item number 5 is an ordinance amending the planning code to allow construction of accessory dwelling units in District 8. And item number 6 is an ordinance amending the planning code to allow construction of accessory dwelling units in District 3.
Okay, thank you very much. Supervisor Weiner is the author of item number 5, and Supervisor Christensen, who has joined us, she is the author of item number 6. I first recognize Supervisor Weiner.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It is great to be here again today with this legislation, which is the third piece of legislation around increasing in-law units that I've authored in the last year, and which would expand the work that we've previously done. And I want to also thank Supervisor Christensen for expanding this concept into District 3. It's terrific to see more parts of the city be able to access this important kind of housing. Of course, colleagues, as we know, our housing crisis will require a number of different approaches to address it. And I won't go through the laundry list of all the things that I think a lot of us think we need to do. But certainly one piece of the puzzle is allowing people more flexibility to add, whether you call them in-law units, accessory dwelling units, or whatnot, into your existing buildings, whether a single-family home or space in a multi-unit building that's not currently being used for residential purposes. We know that we have an awful lot of unused space in buildings in various parts of our city that are not currently being used for residential purposes, but that could be, whether it's a garage or a storage area or a basement that's partially above ground. This legislation will build on the Castro in-law unit legislation that I authored last year and that this board passed unanimously. as well as the seismic in-law legislation that I authored earlier this year, which allows in-law units to be added into buildings undergoing seismic retrofit. And it will build on this legislation by expanding the Castro in-law legislation to the entirety of the district I represent, District 8, including allowing for the creation of new rent-controlled units if it's being added into an existing rent-controlled building. The Castro legislation that we passed last year enjoyed broad support, including from the Castro Eureka Valley Neighborhood Association, the Bay Area Reporter, the Alice B. Toklas LGBT Democratic Club, Livable City, and Spur. And the legislation before us today that expands that legislation to the rest of the district has been endorsed by the Board of Directors of the Glen Park Association, as well as by the Diamond Heights Community Association. We know that our city has been growing and continues to grow. San Francisco is growing by 10,000 people a year, and our housing creation, our housing production has not kept up. We need to find different ways to create housing for our growing population. We know that in-law units are the most affordable type of non-subsidized housing that we, according to various studies by HUD, by Berkeley, by AARP. They tend to be smaller than other units. They tend to be on the ground floor. They're not, because they're built into existing buildings, they're not fancy new construction. For the most part, the infrastructure needed is already in place and simply has to be extended into the new unit. So these units are more affordable. They're also more accessible for seniors, for people with mobility challenges, because they're typically on the ground floor. They're also inherently decentralized, so their impacts on a particular neighborhood are not going to be significant. You'll have a unit here, a unit there, and they will be spread out and diffuse in their impacts. So the controls that or the proposal here for the remainder of District 8 is the same as what we proposed and what the board unanimously passed for the Castro. One in-law unit for any building currently having up to 10 units, and 2 in-law units for any building greater than 10 units. It must be constructed entirely within the building envelope and constructed using space that is not currently being used for residential purposes. As noted, if a building is currently subject to rent control, so will the new unit. And I would be honored to have your support. And I will now defer to Supervisor Christensen.
Thank you. Supervisor Christensen, welcome.
Thank you. And I'm grateful to Supervisor Wiener for spearheading a lot of this effort in District 8. I think there are a lot of us who feel like it's time for this to happen. We're certainly at a situation with housing in the city where it's meaningful. For my district, where we have some of the oldest neighborhoods in the city and where we are probably the most densely built of any district in San Francisco, this is a way we can do our part to try to add more housing to the city's stock. Where this has been called in-law legislation in a lot of cases, with us, we have a very large percentage of our population that's living in buildings of with units, 10 units or more. We have a lot of 20, 30, even 40-unit buildings, many of which are early 20th century or post-war, with a lot of boiler rooms and storage space and mechanical that's no longer needed for that purpose. And we've had a lot of interest from building owners in being allowed to add, not to expand existing units, but to actually allow more units. I was drawn to this as one solution to our housing situation, in that it does preserve the character of our neighborhoods by not altering the exterior envelopes of building. As Supervisor Wiener said, there's a lot of advantage to having a dispersion of housing rather than having it come down in any one location. The fact that the units are more likely to be accessible to seniors and to those with mobility issues. And since my district, 95% of the buildings in District 3 were built before 1979, there's a very, very high probability that any of these new apartments would also be rent controlled. I think the fact that we can do this without cannibalizing existing housing is another plus. So I'm delighted to join this move toward one more solution for the situation, and very much hope that we can see this through. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, colleagues. Supervisor Wiener Christensen, are there any other staff presentations? No? Okay, let's take public comment. I'm sorry. Looks like there's a plan. There is, the planning department is here.
I'm Patrick Manetshaw.
Mr. Manetshaw, hold on. I'm going to let the Planning Commission make a short presentation on the legislation, and then we'll call you up. Okay.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Kimi Hadadan from Planning. The Commission heard this item on July 16th and recommended support of this legislation. The ADUs are a pragmatic infill strategy for housing, and they'll be added to existing residential buildings that are already developed and not likely to be redeveloped, and therefore allow a more efficient use of these areas of the city to provide more housing. And they would also allow additional rental housing on the market in the area of the city that don't have high concentrations of housing. The Commission made one recommended modification in terms of the number of ADUs allowed per lot. Currently, the two proposed ordinances are aligned in all the controls except for the number of ADUs allowed per lot, and the Commission recommends that District 8 would amend the ordinance so that the numbers allowed align with District 3's proposal. Currently, in District 8, similar to what's allowed in a Castro, allows one ADU in buildings of 10 units or less, and only 2 ADUs for larger buildings of more than 10 units. And in District 3, as well as the seismic retrofit ADU program, one ADU is allowed for buildings of 4 units or less, and for larger size buildings, there's no cap on the number of ADUs allowed per lot. And the Commission found that strategy is more aligned with the departments in the city's recent strategy in terms of controlling density, which is more using form-related factors such as height, bulk, open space requirements. And similarly, in this legislation, there are some form-related factors, the fact that ADUs they need to be within the existing built envelope, and they cannot use space from existing residential units. And the Commission recommended to use the same strategy. So for District 8, the recommendation would be one ADU for buildings of 4 units or less, and no cap on the number for larger sized buildings. I'm here for any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you for being here for questions. Supervisor Kim has a few.
Actually, my question was specifically on what you just stated, because I found that a little bit confusing in the report. So, because I think that it should be consistent between items 5 and 6 as well. So, in District 8, the recommendation was what was originally recommended previously, which is 1 ADU for, you said, buildings of 10 units and under?
Yes.
And 2 units for 10 units and above.
Mm-hmm.
And in District 3, what has been proposed is actually what the Planning Commission is recommending, which is 1 unit for buildings 4 units and below, and unlimited?
Yes.
For 4 units and above, but restricted to the density.
It'll be restricted.
Density controls.
To form controls, basically restricted to the fact that the unit has to be within the existing building envelope, and also cannot take space for any of the existing residential units.
And I know you spoke to this briefly, but why is it that the Commission felt that this was more consistent?
This is more aligned with what the city does in mixed-use areas of the city that have no density controls in terms of number of units per lot or number of units per certain square footage of a lot. And, for example, the UMU, the other mixed-use zoning districts in some areas of the city. Some of the named NC districts are like that too. So basically, the number of units that can be built per lot is only controlled by form-related factors such as height, bulk, FAR limits, open space requirements, and also type of units in terms of bedrooms. So this would be very aligned with that. So we already have some form-related controls, and we can get a more efficient use of these areas, unused areas in a building. So as long as the built form of the building is not being changed, then you can add as many units as possible.
This may be a difficult question to answer, and I see a long line of public comments. I'm not going to take up too much time because I'd like to hear from the public, and maybe I'll ask more questions after. Are there a lot of parcels or buildings where you anticipate that there may be buildings that would be eligible to build even more than 2 accessory dwelling units in District 3? It seems unlikely, but I'm just curious.
We haven't done that analysis of how many we can do, but in the environmental report, I think there was an analysis that about like 10% of the buildings eligible can add 2 units.
Okay. And in the legislations that are before us, is there a provision on a monitoring requirement to see how these programs are going?
Correct. There's already a monitoring program in the code for all ADUs, so the intention of that program is to monitor the affordability of ADUs. So these new ADUs would be subject to the same monitoring program, which is that the planning department can request the rent amount for these units, and so that if there is some affordability issues, then we can reconsider and take another look at the affordability levels.
Beyond the planning department being able to request the rent amount on these new ADUs, what else is in the monitoring program? Would you mind reminding me and members of the public?
Sure. We're maintaining a master list of all these units, and the planning department can request the rents, and basically what the result of the analysis of rent for these units would be after we get a few of them at least, then we can do analysis on affordability and reconsider if there are any other solutions.
How frequently do you do this monitoring report, and when does it come to the board?
We haven't gotten that many applications yet. There's no threshold, I think, on how many
there is
how
nothing
many units
on
we
the
will get. Yes. No,
so
there's
I assume you're referring to former Supervisor Chu's ordinance on accessory dwelling units. Is that the monitoring program that you're referring to that will apply to items 5 and 6?
No, it's a separate monitoring program just specifically for the new ADUs.
Is it within items 5 and 6, or are you referring to a previous legislation on ADUs?
So a previous legislation, the Castro legislation.
Okay, in Supervisor Wiener's original, which was originally kind of a trial or a test on a smaller part of his district, put in a monitoring program, which will now extend to items 5 and 6 before us.
Correct.
And what was in the monitoring it didn't say anything about, is it annual, is it in 2 years, in 3 years?
I think it's mentioned that 1 year after the adoption of the ordinance, but since we haven't really gotten any ADU built, we don't have enough information to do the analysis.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you. Just to clarify one thing, because we had a long discussion at the Planning Commission on this, to Supervisor Kim's question, that in the District 8, just to respond to Supervisor Kim's question, because this did come up at the Planning Commission, in the District 8 legislation, or excuse me, the Castro legislation that we passed last year, it had the either 1 or 2 unit limit, and so we extended that to the whole district. Supervisor Christensen took a slightly different approach, and the Planning Commission had asked to amend the District 8 legislation to conform to District 3, which personally I don't have an issue with. But the challenge that I have is that all of the outreach that I've done to the different neighborhood associations was with the 1 or 2 unit in mind, so I'm a little uncomfortable without going back and doing that outreach. I'm open to that for the future because I don't have a problem with it in terms of the policy. In terms of the monitoring, we did put monitoring into the Castro legislation that is extended to, I believe, both pieces of legislation. Several ADUs have been approved in the Castro. I don't think any of them, I think some of them, they have building permits now, but they have not actually been completed yet or rented out. So there's no rent to monitor at this point. I think that we'll see it accelerate, and we will see monitoring occur once it becomes more of a full universe of units.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So at this time, we will have public comment.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. I am speaking against the proposal to have unlimited ADUs in District 3. I'm a resident of District 3. And based on media reports in which I recall Supervisor Christensen was asked what she would do to address the housing crisis in San Francisco, she said that we may have to have a conversation about rent control itself. I'm very worried about this current supervisor attempting to eliminate rent control, whether in District 3 or elsewhere in the city. And so I will be casting my vote come November for former Supervisor Aaron Peskin under the guise of anyone but Julie.
Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Paul Weber, and I'm here on behalf of Telegraph Hill dwellers. We're here primarily to ask for time. We understand that this legislation was introduced in June, and we first got wind of it last Monday, a week ago today. And we turned resources, not just within Telegraph Hill dwellers, but other neighborhood associations, to see what we could put together for the Planning Commission. And we went to the Planning Commission empty-handed and said we need more time. There's been no outreach, at least among a number of associations that we contacted. And so I'm here today to ask for the time and to commit that we will provide resources to Supervisor Christensen to sit down with her staff and appropriate people within the city to work through our comments. We submitted to this committee today a letter from Telegraph Hill dwellers. In that is a list of comments we have on the legislation. And I want to emphasize that that list is not just from Telegraph Hill dwellers. It's from a number of associations, both within District 3 and throughout the city, which don't believe they received any or adequate outreach. I'll just mention a couple of them just to give you the idea of the things we're looking at. Number one, as Supervisor Christensen pointed out, there's a protection against cannibalization for dwelling units. There's no comparable one for businesses, and there should be. We also wish to see a cap on the number of units that can be put within an envelope. And further, we don't believe there should be on-street parking permits given out for these extra units, or we're going to have 600 or 700 more cars on the street in North Beach if this program's successful. So as I say, thank you very much.
Next speaker.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Fieber with the San Francisco Tenants Union. I also co-founded the Anti-Eviction Mapping Project. The San Francisco General Plan states a goal of preserving our rent-controlled housing stock, which is the largest source of affordable housing. However, as the Housing Balance Report showed, we lose hundreds of units per year through demolitions, condos, and TIC conversions. And the loss of affordable rents is actually worse because the report does not count tenants who have been forced out through coercive buyouts or shady breach evictions. Since 1979, I estimate that approximately 11% of the rental stock that originally qualified qualified for rent control has been officially demolished, Ellised, or turned into condos. So any effort that creates more rent-controlled housing is commendable. The tenants union may be open to supporting the ADU legislation in principle. However, we will be very attentive to the details. We would like assurances that the new units are actually kept as affordable rental units. I believe that all of you have expressed support for rent-controlled housing, so we should be in agreement. Therefore, there are 3 proposed amendments that would be especially important to us in order to sign on. Number 1, add a provision that ADUs be permanently maintained as rental units, restrict their conversion to individual ownership units for resale. Number 2, add provisions to prohibit ADUs in buildings where tenants have been forced out by the Ellis Act, owner move-ins, or buyouts. Number 3, add a provision to prohibit ADUs from being used for short-term rentals. Finally, please do not rush this legislation through, but take the time to get it right. I thank you for your time. The Tenants Union will be watching attentively how this debate unfolds.
Hi, I'm Teresa Flandrick, representing both Senior and Disability Action as well as North Beach Tenants Committee. And I am here today. We did not plan this, but following Jennifer Fieber is great because those are the exact same amendments I would like to support, and I know that those of us at SDA as well as our Tenants Committee are in support of that. I had brought with me a couple of examples of buildings where actually a couple had been forced out. Back in 2000, an illegal in-law had been legalized and is now currently used as a vacation rental along with an entire unit within the same building. So this has been added, the now legal in-law. So that this exists, that this is a reality, this is something that really frightens us, and I would really hope that you would be sure to amend this to protect the housing so these truly can be available to others, that it indeed be affordable. As well as there's another building, 2005, it was actually withdrawn from the rental market. People were evicted under the Ellis Act. They were given permission to merge 2 units into one and then add an additional unit, which is now also on Airbnb. So that this exists, I would really hope that you would have these protections in place if we're truly to add affordable housing. Thank you.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Rob Poole. I'm the project manager at the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. We're here to support Supervisor Christensen and Supervisor Wiener's legislation. We've been talking about in-law units in San Francisco for a long time, decades. And this is as good of a time as any to get this going. After all these years, we finally made progress. We have new in-laws that are allowed to be built in the Castro. We have an ADU handbook that shows people what we can do in San Francisco in specific neighborhoods under specific building envelopes. And this is great, and we should keep moving forward. This program should be expanded to these other neighborhoods that are before us today. These kinds of units they're cheaper to build. They're naturally more affordable than any other kind of housing we're going to see built that's not subsidized. They don't require thousands of dollars per unit of subsidy. They don't affect neighborhood character. They're inherently sustainable. This is one of many logical solutions to the severe housing shortage and housing crisis that we're facing today. We should absolutely support this movement forward to the full board. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, supervisors. I'm Betsy Eddy, and I'm president of the Diamond Heights Community Association. Our association board supports the accessory dwelling unit legislation for District 8 for 2 reasons. The legislation would provide much needed affordable rental housing in Diamond Heights. And we also feel the legislation has the potential to increase the income of residents in our neighborhood, particularly for those residents who may in the future struggle to remain in San Francisco because of the high cost of living here. We were very appreciative that on January 31st, Supervisor Wiener held a community meeting for Diamond Heights and Glen Park. And at the meeting, Supervisor Wiener explained the legislation, answered very many questions. And at that meeting, attended by over 70 people, the comments on the legislation were favorable. So we do thank Supervisor Wiener for sponsoring this legislation, and we do hope your committee will approve it today. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lin Wing. I have a small apartment building. I support ADU. Thanks.
Next speaker.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jane Lee. I'm small public tech the owner, and I support ADU. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Winnie. I support ADU.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Ching Lam. I'm a small property owner. I support ADU law because our city needs more housing now. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Ivan Sun. I was once a rental, and now I'm a homeowner. And I totally support the ADU legislation because I feel that it really creates some rental properties to rent out. Not like all the other rent ordinance, which prohibit or make the homeowner reluctant to rent the house out now. I know a lot of friends that have rental properties.
Thank you.
Or like in-laws, which once they look at the rent ordinance, they're afraid to rent out their properties now because the rent ordinance are all swinging on the rental side. It doesn't protect the owner. The owners are afraid of them. So that creates less rental properties now. So what we need to do is to change the rent ordinances to make it swing back more towards the owners so that owners are not afraid to rent the property out. Like I have my own property rented out 6 years ago. Now I had a hard time to take it back for myself because all these rent ordinances, they're like a lot of mines for us. Anything we step on it, we step on the mine. That's really bad ordinances. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Stephen Lai. I'm a renter, but I strongly, support, the idea for ADU. I support it. I think, we have that happen, and then we'll add more housing, more units, so that the rent will go down. Because you know that there's more supply, then the price will go down.
Thank you. Next speaker. Please pull the microphone to your mouth.
I'm a housing. I support the ADU. Thank you.
Do I have to say it again?
Good afternoon. I am Anna Louis. I am housing, and then I support the ADU. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gloria, and I am an owner. I want to support the ADU. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Hello, my name is Kasper Leung, a small property owner. I strongly support ADU. Thanks.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. Kathleen Dooley, North Beach Business Association. While we support this in theory, what we are very disturbed about is the complete lack of outreach to our association. We have several issues that we feel could have easily been resolved before this, but because no outreach whatsoever was done to us, we're here today. The three main things we're concerned about are the provision of allowing conversion of ground floor retail into homes. We certainly oppose that. The lack of 311 commercial noticing, we feel that is necessary. Also, the parking. If these folks are going to be occupying many hundreds of units, we already face an enormous parking crunch in our neighborhood that this affects the merchants also. I'd also just like to say, in the past, the last two supervisors we have were really great about reaching out to all of our organizations, everybody. This has not been the case so far, and we would urge Supervisor Christensen in the future to do outreach, because we're all in District 3. It affects all of us. So don't just be selective about who you're reaching out to. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
I'm Lai Fong. I own I support ADU law. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, supervisors. My name is Chong Leung Go. I am a renter. I'm very strong support this ADU because the government no more affordable house to give us our new immigrants. And then we are San Francisco is the development city, so we need more house. But the ADU is the very fast, can support more houses for us. So I'm very strong support this legislation. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Yvonne. I'm the property owner. I support ADU legislation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, supervisors. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Chris Shulman. I'm a resident of District 3. I'm also on the board of Laurel Polk Neighbors and the Laurel Polk Community Benefit District. I do want to be clear, though, that I'm not representing either of those organizations today. I'm here in my own capacity. My comments are specific to District 3. I want to make it clear I support the intent and a majority of this legislation. I just think there's some details that need to be considered. Laurel Polk Neighbors and the CBD were not reached out to regarding the ordinance or given an opportunity to comment. LPM was first notified last Wednesday with an email requesting support. Due to the timing of the email, we were unable to consider a position, but would welcome the opportunity to comment. I'd request that we either continue or consider amendments that will improve the legislation, especially in the areas such as anti-speculation, neighborhood notice, preservation of commercial spaces, and parking issues. I just want to reiterate that I definitely support the intent. I support the majority of it. I'd just like to see it finally tuned in a way that will benefit everyone, both property owners and renters. Thank you so much.
Hi, good afternoon, dear supervisor and everybody. I'm gratefully, I'm strong to support ADU.
Hi, my name is Mina Yang. I'm a San Francisco resident. This is one of the most refreshing proposals I've heard for a long time. Our city must be nimble and flexible and be open in order to increase the housing stock, and this is great. I strongly support ADU. Thank you.
My support ADU.
I'm Tony Robles with Senior and Disability Action. As in all legislation, really the devil is in the detail, and I understand the intent behind this proposal. Seeing that the city has lost rental stock, has lost housing stock, that we need to preserve the stock that we have and try to find creative ways to add to it. My big concern about this is that it'll be abused. We know that the proliferation of short-term rentals in North Beach and other parts of the city has actually facilitated us coming together and trying to find new ways to get housing. So I think the ideas of prohibiting these units as being short-term rentals, and also prohibiting units that were made vacant by the Ellis Act or no-fault or low-fault evictions. The thing is, we need to regulate these so that that type of abuse does not happen, and that people that don't have our best interests at heart aren't rewarded. Thank you.
Hello. Good afternoon. My name is Jin Chiu. I am owner. I support ADU. Thank you.
Supervisors, my name is Richard Lau. I go to senior lunchroom quite often, and there are 4 senior lunchrooms. One in 77 Stockton Street, one in International Hotel, one in Lady Shore, one in Telegram Hill, and once a while I go to the aquatic park, and when we sit down, we talk about housing. We need housing. And when I talk to the seniors, they want the in-law as soon as possible. And I read Chinese paper and English paper, and I do have a computer. There's lots of emails concerning this in-law, making it legally. So the publication is there, and people know about it. And I want to say to you that I'm living under the rent control, SRO, and from time to time, recently, Supervisor Christensen went to the community and make her pitch, and she gave me assurance and give us, all those under the rent control, that she will continue to fight for rent control. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sonia Traus, and I don't normally do this, but today I am speaking on behalf of the 300 members of the San Francisco Bay Area Renters Federation, because we unambiguously support adding to the stock of housing via ADUs and also adding to the stock of rent-controlled housing. This is an astonishing thing. There's no other way to do it. If ever anyone wondered why SF Bay Area Renters Federation exists, you might look at the testimony earlier by the tenants union, where they were not supporting this legislation, which is also astonishing. That is exactly the kind of position of the tenants union that forced me to have to start my own organization, because there are lots of tenants out there who do want more units, who do want more rent control units. I'm not worried that maybe some of them won't be on the market because they might be Airbnb'd. Guess what? That basement, that garage, is definitely not on the market right now. With probability 1, it is not on the market. If you turn it into a house, it might be on the market. That's an improvement. That dominates our current situation. Thank you very much. I look forward to this legislation. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Frank Tay. I own a piece of property, single house, I support ADU regulations. There's a fast way to create the rental unit, more unit in the market, and also can helping the owner little bit to pay their higher property tax. Thank you very much.
Hello, good evening. My name is Ann Kong. I am the owner now, but I was a tenant for 10 years, and then both will and I will support the ADU. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
My name is Bruce Bonacker, and I'm here to represent the Glen Park Association. Our board of directors came to a consensus in support of the legislation. We did have some recommendations for improvements to the legislation from our perspective. We did send a letter to Supervisor Wiener with copy to all other supervisors so that you have this in printed record as well as email record. But I'd like to point out two of the suggestions that we made. One is that you protect us from encroachment of the Airbnb type of units in the ADUs. The ADUs are going to be, in effect, a deviation from the planning code. They're going to be getting special status and special dispensation for being able to be identified as ADUs. We don't feel, therefore, that the Airbnb category, or I should say the Airbnb use, ought to be applied to these units. I do want to make a point that the Budget and Legislative Analysts Policy Analysis Report, Executive Summary on short-term rentals does not cover this in any way, shape, or form, so that this is not something where a nexus has been applied to either saying, hey, it's not a problem or it is a problem. Secondly, we feel that in the interest of the property owners, that if an ADU is created, that an ADU can be removed without discretionary review by the property owner if a change in that property owner's living situation were to arise. Under any case, we do support the legislation. We feel that these improvements that we have suggested can be made either to the legislation or in other ways, but we feel that these are important. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Important issue. Comments? Yeah. Okay. I am supporting the ADUs, and I see this very much as a situation where we are in a state of trauma and emergency surgery has to be done. I also have very great faith that the assembled supervisors, combined with the alertness of the people, will craft policy that will be good surgery as well. We know what the possible sequelae of this surgery could be, and I think since we're alert to it, we are able to avoid it, again, by crafting the policy that I know you can do. I'd like to speak to the point that I did attend the Planning Commission meeting about this, and the issue of retail disappearing was pretty much dismissed by an understanding that there would be an amendment or discussion of that in the plan itself, and that's a non-issue. As to parking, it is a red herring that comes up all the time in neighborhoods. This is, particularly District 3, is a district with the lowest car ownership in the city, and it's very unlikely in a population where people understand the issues of parking and crowding, and like myself, have chosen not to have an automobile, that people in these low-income units would choose to have an automobile, understanding the problems with that. So I think this is a non-issue. I am very encouraged by the people speaking here and that they understand it and the importance of it, and unfortunately simultaneously disheartened that there are efforts to delay this that are simply partisan politics. But I think we all can deal with it and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Supervisors, David Elliott Lewis, speaking as a long-term renter in the city. You know, there are very good reasons why not every square foot of a residential space is converted into housing. It's because not every square foot should be. There's spaces used for parking, for community space, for ground floor retail or above ground floor retail. To lose all this, to add more units of questionable housing quality, questionable habitability, but probably inadequate ventilation, especially if you're talking about putting units in where there's boiler rooms, or is this going to be apartments without windows and ventilation? Think about it. There's no protection for any kind of quality of life in these units. That's just one concern. I would ask for a time for community input to measure the needs for parking protection, retail business protection, and let's not reward Ellis Act victors with more profit. They've done enough harm to our community as it is. I think you've heard some really good concerns about why we need to kind of modify this bill. As it stands right now, the ADU bill, I cannot support it. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Supervisor. Sue Vaughn. I'm going to reiterate a lot of what other people have said. I agree there should be no ADU approval for properties in which there have been no-fault evictions, Ellis Act, OMI, or buyouts. Additionally, there should be no conversion of ground floor retail into accessory dwelling units. I concur that there should be no extension of residential parking permits to new tenants of accessory dwelling units. And I will add that you all are going to be considering legislation, the Transportation Sustainability Program legislation, now or sometime this fall. And I think that every new unit of housing that we build in this city, even if it's a single-family home, should be assessed a transportation impact fee. All of these new units will cumulatively have an impact on our transportation, so these units should be assessed a transportation impact fee. And I also want to express my concerns about the quality of whatever gets built, and that I don't think these should be accessory dwelling micro units, that these should concur with our current codes about the minimum number of square feet. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. Dawn Trennert. I'm the chair of the Middle Polk Neighborhood Association in District 3. And if you would have asked me 2 days ago if I would have been here today, I would have said absolutely not. But over the weekend, I got several phone calls asking if the Middle Polk Neighborhood Association has taken a position on this. And we didn't really know much about it. I think people want to be heard on this, and may I respectfully request some additional outreach to neighbors that I think it would be probably mining for gold. I don't have any particular problem with the plan, but it seems like a lot of people haven't heard about it. At least that's what phone calls were indicating over the weekend. So, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Gen Fujioka. I'm the policy director at Chinatown Community Development Center, and I'm here to present a letter on behalf of 6 housing tenant counseling organizations, the Asian Law Caucus, Kauzu Justa, Dolores Street Community Services, Housing Rights Committee of San Francisco, and the San Francisco Tenants Union. We historically, and particularly Asian Law Caucus, has worked very long and hard in support of ADUs. We have our organization support the development expansion of additional housing in general. We're concerned about some specifics with respects to the legislation. In particular, the present legislation, I'll quote from the letter, the present legislation does nothing to protect existing residents against displacement and eviction spurred by the development of these new units, and does not assure that the newly constructed housing will in reality become rental units subject to either rent control or in fact being rented out at all. We think that these kinds of protections can be included in the legislation. This is the kind of protection that was included previously when we worked together with Supervisor Chu with respect to his in-law unit legislation, and we think it's particularly unfortunate that that language wasn't carried over into this legislation. The impact of expanding these additional units can easily become a spur to speculation, and Ellis Evictions were very concerned that these protections are not in place. If the intent is to create and expand rental housing, then let's make sure that language is included in this legislation. We also, I should also say that we would also appreciate the opportunity to have additional time to work with the supervisors in including this.
Thank you. Have you spoken on this item already?
I am. You're not allowed to, right?
No, you can only speak one time.
Okay. I was just going to talk about outreach.
I'm sorry.
Personally have been privy
I'm sorry.
to it. Okay.
You've already spoken.
My name is Josephine Zhao. I'm the president of BetterHousingPolicies.org. Our 1,000 members were happy to hear about the news on the ADU a couple of times at all major local Chinese press. There was good outreach. And a quarter of our tenant membership living in illegal ADUs wished the units were up to code when it was built for safety and health reasons. Our other 3/4 of property owners who may have stepped on the landmine, like the other speaker said, who have secretly and privately rented out illegal units and had to be sued and had to pay for $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 and forever remove and close down those units, which there is a pathway to reopen the space that otherwise is unused. And they wish that there is no punishment for doing so. The legislation was fair to both sides, and both renters and property owners can benefit. Because if a law that is made with unrealistic harsh conditions and punishment, no one will want to use it, and it's not a fair law, and it won't be constructive. It will be a law sitting empty, and if nothing would have happened. So I'm glad this legislation has support from both sides. The legislation gives a fresh start for everyone involved. It opens up new venues that property owners are not punished for providing good housing service, and renters have more option to live in a nice new housing unit that would have helped them combat sky-high rents and affordability issue. Please support the ADU.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak on these two items? All right, thank you. I'm going to close public comment at this time. Thank you to the public. Supervisor Weiner.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the members of the public who came out. Today I want to, for District 8, thank Betsy Eddy from the Diamond Heights Community Association and Bruce Boniger from the Glen Park Association for coming out, and for both organizations supporting the legislation, in addition to all of the Castro Upper Market endorsements that we received when the Castro portion of this was before the board last year. Before I get to the substance, I know there were a number of comments about process, and I want to talk about process, because I have to say what we saw today, on the one hand I want to say it's surprising, given how thoroughly vetted this entire issue has been for about a year and a half in the city, but I'll say it's not surprising. And I was surprised when we went to the Planning Commission, which by unanimous, enthusiastic votes supported the Castro legislation, supported the seismic legislation. The commissioners could not say enough positive things about those two pieces of legislation that I authored. On Thursday, two of them, residents of District 3, voted against the legislation. The identical District 8 legislation just expanded to other neighborhoods, and a largely identical District 3 legislation. When the Castro legislation and the seismic legislation came to the Board of Supervisors Land Use Committee last year and earlier this year, there was overwhelming support and very, very little, if any, opposition. Today, we have a series of people from District 3 coming out and saying, well, I sort of support the legislation, but I just want more process. And I'll leave it to Supervisor Christensen to talk about the outreach that she's done in this legislation. What has changed between then? Unanimous support at the Planning Commission, big support at the Land Use Committee. What's changed is that we now have a supervisorial election in District 3, and I'm just going to call out the elephant in the room. And when I see the comments that were made today, and at least I don't know who everyone is supporting in District 3, I have my own district to worry about, but I know who some people are supporting. It just is, I don't want to say surprising, because nothing in politics surprises me anymore, but it is disappointing. We have a housing crisis in this city, and the reason we have a housing crisis is that every time someone comes along with a proposal to try to at least take one modest step to create more housing, and in this case to create more rent-controlled housing, there's every objection in the book around parking, around building codes, even though these have to be up to building code, around every conceivable objection, and then politics infuses in it. Well, I will say, and I said this at the Planning Commission, when I first started working on the Castro in-law legislation last year, one of the very first things that I did is I had my staff go and get a copy from the archives of legislation that then Supervisor Aaron Peskin proposed 10 years ago, allowing new in-law units citywide. That legislation that, to his credit, Supervisor Peskin proposed, unfortunately, he was not successful, which is why we started out with a smaller scale approach. But Aaron Peskin proposed it, was not successful, and that was our starting point in deciding to move forward with the Castro legislation that has now become the District 8 legislation and also the District 3 legislation. We need to focus on the actual policy of addressing the housing crisis in this city. Again, I will let Supervisor Christensen discuss her outreach in her district, but this is good legislation and it deserves to be supported. I do want to address a few specific issues that were raised. I respect the concerns around short-term rentals, and that is an issue that did come up last time that this issue was before the board, about will these just become short-term rental units. And we have restrictions on short-term rentals, and they apply to all housing, whether it's a single-family home or an apartment or a condo or an accessory dwelling unit. It applies to all units of housing. I don't think, although I understand and respect the concern, I don't think it makes sense to say a certain category of housing is somehow going to be treated differently in terms of short-term rentals. Because after these units are built in 5, 10, 20 years, no one's going to know, oh, this was built under the accessory dwelling unit ordinance. They're just going to see it as a unit of housing, but this is going to be treated differently than every other unit in the city. In addition, one of the commenters spoke about building codes. These have to comply with building codes, and in fact, the Department of Building Inspection and the Planning Department recently put out an ADU handbook to try to guide people through the planning and building code process. And in terms of square footage and minimum square footage, these units will have to comply with the same rules that every other unit in the city have to comply with in terms of minimum square footage. And then finally, in terms of conversion of retail space to residential space, that is governed by general rules that apply through neighborhood commercial districts throughout the city. There is a process if someone wants to convert retail to residential. It's not an easy process, and I, in my district at least, can't think of a single example in my time where a retail space has been converted to residential, and I think there are two reasons for that. It's hard to do, and there would be a lot of opposition to it. But second, in terms of per square footage, retail space is incredibly lucrative, and I don't see it as being an issue. I think if we want to take a look at that issue in the broad sense, I'd be more than happy to do that. I think we should always be looking and re-looking at these issues, but it's not an issue that's in any way unique to accessory dwelling units, and I'm not particularly concerned that it's going to happen here. So with that, I will defer to Supervisor Christensen.
Thank you. Let's talk about outreach. Mr. Shulman, I was at a Lower Polk Neighbors meeting where this was discussed. I've got witnesses who were there. Ms. Trenert, same thing for the Lower Polk Neighbors. I think that's what Ms. Savitt was trying to say, is that she was present at that meeting and it was discussed. So a little disappointed to see politics creeping into this, but the idea of increasing housing in District 3 is a conversation that I've been having with neighbors since I became a supervisor. The crisis is citywide. It's very challenging to meet this crisis in District 3, and we've been looking for ways to do that since the first day I stepped into this office. So this has been a long, ongoing conversation, and we have a long list of people with whom I've had that conversation. But I appreciate the comments that were made today, and I encourage the people here. Reading legislation is really boring, but this is a fairly short one, so it's fairly easy to read. And some of the concerns that you have are probably addressed in the legislation itself. But for those that are not, let me go over a few of the items, because I think people have brought up good points. They're legitimate concerns. I'll try to go through them quickly. Rent control. First of all, I support rent control. And anybody who's told you different is not telling you the truth. One of the things I think is exciting about this, as we've said, is that this will add rent-controlled units. It's hard to do that, and this will do that. All these ADU units will be rent-controlled units. I think that's a good thing. The concern about permanent affordability, I'm totally sympathetic to this, because the real challenge that we have in this city is not only adding housing, but adding true affordable housing. And that's very hard to do. And largely we're doing it by government-subsidized projects, which we can't build fast enough. So I appreciate that. On the other hand, the ADU legislation is a way to incentivize private property owners to add to the city's housing stock. We're trying to get people to take money out of their own pockets and help us out by building more housing. And these are not big developers, big investors. These are a lot of mom and pop property owners that have the opportunity to help us out by adding housing stock. So in this particular case, I hesitate to withdraw that incentive by adding additional financial limitations, by making it less likely for people to be able to recoup the investment that they put into creating this housing. So I think one of the things, we're guilty of it at the Board of Supervisors, we're guilty of it in the city of San Francisco, is that every time we take a step, we load ourselves up with all the hopes and wishes and the dreams that we have to accomplish the things that we want to do, and a lot of times that burden just keeps us in one spot. So in this particular case, and this is something we can change later, nothing we're doing here today is permanent for the rest of our existence, but if we can see this project get underway, if we can see these ADUs start to take off, we can certainly revisit the issue of affordability. But for now, our challenge is to get this plane off the runway. And I think, as we've seen in past efforts, it's not enough to just allow things to happen. We have to incentivize them. So my next step after we pass this is not to just sit back and see what happens, but to try to see what we can do to encourage people to actually take advantage of this opportunity. Short-term rental controls. Ms. Fleindrich, totally agree. I think often of the trip that you and I took around the neighborhood and at the hoteling of the buildings in our district and what a problem that is. The good news is that these new units are going to be susceptible to all the existing rent-controlled limits, which are not strong enough yet. I totally agree. But we don't, I believe, need to add more controls, because controls will already be there. So as we ramp up and begin to be more effective in reducing the hoteling of our rental units, it will also apply to these units. Right now, the law is that you must be a permanent resident of a unit in order to rent it out. All of the lease agreements between tenants and property owners exist. Those will apply to these units as well. The commercial conversion question, the interesting thing right now, none of us want our prime commercial space converted to residential units. I don't think any of us want that. I asked that question about this legislation, and I think the first thing that's important to think about is that right now, if you're in a building without a density limit issue, you can convert commercial to residential right now. We don't have restrictions that say that's impossible. But to Supervisor Weiner's point, it generally doesn't happen. And the reason it doesn't happen is because you can't make as much money off of a residential apartment as you can off a commercial space. Commercial rates are higher. And once you've converted a commercial space to residential, you can't go back. And so for somebody to say, I'm going to convert my storefront into a residential unit, you have to be willing to take less rent. You have to be willing to then be rent controlled, which the commercial spaces are not due to state law, and you have to not be able to ever go back and change your mind. The incentives to do that are not very great, and as Supervisor Weiner says, we have other controls and reviews in place, and so that was something that we were worried about, but as we investigated it, we decided it was probably not a big issue. If it turns out to be, we can certainly revisit it. Concerns about the cap on the number of units. The number of units are going to be capped by some very practical physical conditions, and that is the envelope of the building. You can only add as many units as will fit inside the existing envelope. And this is important because I think this touches on the concern that a number of people brought up. We still have to meet building code. So you cannot take a 4 by 4 square foot room and call it an apartment. You have to meet all the building code requirements for bathrooms and bedrooms and windows and egress. So in order for a new unit to be approved, it has to meet the building code. So the envelope of the building and these building codes are by their very nature going to restrict the number of units that we can add. What we do have in District 3, as I said, is a lot of very large apartment buildings that were built in the first half of the 20th century when space was, there for the taking, and people were building massive boiler rooms and storage rooms and ground floor plinths, and some of those are looking pretty tasty right now as potential apartment sites. And one of the things that made me really push on this is that right now, under current code, property owners can add bedrooms to existing units. They can do it, and they are doing it right now. So that means that this precious space is allowing property owners to create 4-bedroom, $10,000 a month apartments when we could be adding additional dwelling units. We're passing up that opportunity every day that goes by. Hence the haste for this legislation. The parking question, that's another tough one, I agree. Because with parking at such a premium, it is hard to imagine that we would have to find space for a few hundred more people who may or may not have cars. And that is an issue, and I admit it. To Supervisor Weiner's point earlier, one of the great things about these units is we're not talking about suddenly putting 200 units of housing in one spot. We're talking about units that are likely to be dispersed throughout the neighborhood, spreading out that need. As Ms. Savitt mentioned, we are already the district with the fewest number of cars per capita of any district, and statistically, the people that are moving into the neighborhood now are much less likely to own cars than the people who already live there. So we have some help there. But the main thing about the parking is we at the Board of Supervisors can't control that. The MTA controls that. So we're not able with this legislation to limit the parking. That's something that has to be taken up in a different forum. So again, we can make changes down the line, but at the moment, my goal is to do this sensible thing, which has been discussed not just in the last 3 to 6 months, but in the last decade, to take this sensible step forward and to see how it works. And if we need to adjust it, we can adjust it, as we do many things that we do here at City Hall. But I think the abiding message here is we don't have to just hold hearings and carry signs and protest and wring our hands and write articles and blogs about how bad things are, there are actually things we can do about it, little step at a time, and this is one of them. And it makes sense to me. That's why I was glad to champion it. I'm very grateful for Supervisor Wiener's leadership on this and helping us along with it as well, and I certainly hope that we can support this and get it done.
Thank you. Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. And Supervisor Christensen, thank you for your comments on a number of the amendments requested by members of the public. I have one question, and then I want to raise some issues that I've raised before with other accessory dwelling unit and in-law legislation, not just the ones before us. So I had a question on it's one of the issues that came up about removing from the notification requirement. I guess this is those that are increasing dwelling units and therefore raising up to 3 additional feet. So the heights are suitable for residential use on the lower floors. That this type of permit would be exempt from the notification requirements of Section 311 and 312. And I know some concerns came up about that the community and neighborhood did want notification on these types of changes. And I was curious as to why that exemption is in this ordinance.
Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you. So the ordinance, and I believe this is identical, the 311 provisions are identical to the Castro legislation as well as the seismic legislation, the 311. It does have 311 notice, and people can file a discretionary review, but I'll ask the planning department to comment on the substance of the provision.
The increased heights provisions only listed under the seismic retrofit ADU program. So this 311 exemption is basically allowing this height increase that is available through the building code already to move forward without notification, and it only applies to the seismic ADU program.
Thank you for that reminder, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that's because sometimes when you do a seismic retrofit, there can be a slight change to the height of the building. So thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't remember that in the other legislation. So this is consistent with the seismic retrofit legislation. So any additional changes? Sorry.
So the exemption from the 311 notification is what we're providing in the planning code to go along with what is already in the building code that allows that height increase, so that height increase can move forward without a notification.
Specifically for an accessory dwelling unit or other uses too?
So the building code already allows, if a building is going through the seismic retrofit building, to go through to increase the height, and basically this provision says that if you're adding a unit, an ADU in the building, then you don't have to do the 311
or the 312. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so this is consistent with previous ordinances?
Correct.
Okay.
It's just clarification in the previous ordinance.
And Madam Chair, if I may, it's just, it has to do with the foundation work that can raise the height of the building by a few feet.
Okay.
Thank you.
It had been mentioned that it was also to accommodate the height, to make sure that it was to ensure that the height of the residential unit is appropriate as well, so it's not too low.
Correct. So it allows non-conforming buildings to also go above that.
Thank you. So I want to make a couple of specific comments, but I want to acknowledge that this is legislation in other districts, both in 3 and 8. I do think in general that we should be careful about allowing ADUs within the NCD and eliminating or reducing ground floor retail or commercial. I did hear from the author that they felt that this would be very difficult given the lucrative nature of commercial versus residential. But given that, I would support a prohibition of ADUs being added within the boundaries of an NCD, but I do want to respect the sponsor, so I won't be making that amendment, but I just want to state that. A couple of other things. I do think that the two levels of ADUs between 3 and 8 should be consistent. And I think given the fact that this is still relatively new, I would support the lower number. So what is in Supervisor Wiener's ordinance before us, limiting it to 1 and 2. I think that makes sense. And then finally, I'll just say that I do think that a monitoring requirement is important. I understand that we haven't had a lot of property owners take advantage of the legislation yet, and that's why we do not have a report yet, but I am very curious as these ordinances go into effect, the number of people that take advantage of it and kind of what the outcomes of that is. Now, moving to what I consider to be more citywide issues concerning these legislation, and something that I brought up previously both with Supervisor Chu and Supervisor Wiener's legislations on either in-laws or with accessory dwelling units. I know we kind of use both, and now we're primarily using ADU. A couple of things that I would like to make a motion to amend. The first is, and this is consistent with the Chu legislation last year, the current ordinances should be consistent, both items 5 and 6. And we should restrict subdividing these rental units to convert to condo or other fractionalized ownership. The purpose of this legislation is to increase our housing supply. It's something that I know the sponsors have talked about as increasing our rent control housing supply. So similar to what we saw in Supervisor Chu's legislation, I'd like to make a motion to amend that subdivision and lot splits are prohibited. And I do have the language from Supervisor Chu's legislation, notwithstanding the provisions of Article 9 of the Subdivision Code, a lot with an accessory dwelling unit authorized under the section may not be subdivided in a manner that will allow for an ADU to be sold or separately financed pursuant to any condominium plan, housing cooperative, or similar form of separate ownership. Again, I think it's important to be consistent, and also if our message is that we are, again, increasing the supply of rental housing, that we should stick to that and expressly state it. I think, there was a comment made about mergers, prohibiting mergers post-fact. I think I need more time to think about that. That's not something I will support today. The second is the second amendment that I'd like to make a motion for is to prohibit the construction of ADUs in any buildings where tenants have been displaced by Ellis Act eviction or buyout agreement. And then the third, something I tried again most recently with Supervisor Wiener's legislation, is adding a provision prohibiting ADUs from being used for short-term rentals. So those are the three amendments that I'm introducing. We can take them one by one since they're different.
Before we take that motion, I'd have a pointed issue for the city attorney's office. And then we'll have discussion on the motions. Could you opine on how you would protect units from Airbnb? It's a comment that I heard in public during public comment. One of the commenters was interested in some protections in place that these units are not going to be on the Airbnb market. Is there an opinion that you may have on this?
Deputy City Attorney Marlena Byrne, I don't have an opinion as to the policy ramifications of that, but certainly if these are going to be turned into independent dwelling units, then they would be subject to the existing short-term rental legislation that's found in Chapter 41A of the Administrative Code, and under that code, the permanent resident of the unit, as long as they meet the other requirements of that code, can offer their unit for short-term rental. Currently, if they are in the unit when it's rented, they can do it for an unlimited number of days. If they're not in the unit when it's rented, they can do it for up to 90 days a year. But these units would not be treated any differently under that legislation if they became dwelling units. But the restriction that only the permanent resident of that unit could offer the unit for short-term rental would still be applied.
Okay, thank you very much. Question. I have a question for the planning department, and my question is related to parking. Now, in listening to the discussion and reading the legislation, one of the things that was flagged from my perspective was, we've got these ADUs, they're coming online. The people that are going to be potentially renting them could have a car, they could not have a car. The makers of the sponsors have acknowledged that, particularly in District 3, they have the highest, or I should say the lowest, car ownership. I'm curious to know if there's any way that we can introduce a prohibition on allowing residential parking permits to these new ADUs. From my perspective, it seems like it would further exacerbate the parking congestion that exists in the neighborhoods.
I'd have to defer to the city attorney on whether or not you
Okay.
could add that, but it wouldn't be in the planning code. I think it would be part of Department of Parking and Traffic's code.
Thank you. You're right. I should have addressed it to Ms. Burns.
Deputy City Attorney Marlena Byrne, under the charter, the jurisdiction over parking is exclusively with the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency, so this board could not make an amendment that would restrict parking permits for these units, for residents of these units. That would be within the jurisdiction of the MTA.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Supervisor Weiner.
Thank you.
Are you speaking to the motions?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I want to just address the three amendments that Supervisor Kim has proposed. So first, with respect to short-term rentals, and thank you, Madam Chair, for asking that question. These units, they will be housing units, as like all the existing in-law units in the city, and we have 30 or 40,000 of them, or an apartment or condo or house, all subject to the same restrictions. Right now, if you are living in an existing in-law unit, it's been in existence for a long time, you're subject to the same restrictions that anyone else is subject to. You have to live in the unit at least 3/4 of the year, all the insurance and other requirements. You have to register, pay hotel tax, and so these will be subject to the same restrictions. I don't think that it would be good policy to start saying one category of housing is going to be treated differently with short-term rentals than the rest of the housing stock. I do understand the concern that, well, someone might create a new in-law unit and then just use it as a full-time short-term rental, and that's illegal. It should be illegal. I know that in the legislation we just passed and some of the mayor's recent decisions were increasing enforcement, and those should be cracked down on. And it doesn't matter if it's an in-law unit or a single-family home or whatever it might be, we need to enforce the law. So I don't think that it's the right direction to restrict short-term rentals in these units any more than we've done in every other unit in the city. In terms of the condo conversion ban, and this was raised when we considered the Castro in-law legislation, the concern here is that we already make it's not easy to create one of these units. You have to go through the planning process, go through the building code process. You have to come up with a certain amount of money, and in some buildings it might be a little less expensive, in some buildings it might be more expensive. You have to go through neighborhood notification. You can have a discretionary review to the planning commission. There are a lot of hurdles that people have to go through, but we want them to go through those hurdles. If what we're going to say is, we want you to build these units, we're going to make you go through this whole process, and you have to pay all this money, and your reward for doing so is that you're permanently banned from the condo conversion lottery, I can guarantee you we're not going to see very many of these units, because even if someone has no intent to do that, people are not going to want to have that permanent restriction on their building. We already restructured the condo lottery. It's banned for 10 years, and when it comes back, it's going to be a shadow of what it used to be. It's going to apply to fewer buildings. It's going to have a much higher owner occupancy requirement, and so I don't see it being an issue here. But if we want to make sure that we don't get very many of these units built, then putting restrictions like a condo conversion ban would definitely be a good direction. I think we want to see these units built, and so I wouldn't want to go in that direction. In terms of restricting adding an ADU if you have certain evictions, I would be supportive of having that restriction for Ellis Act evictions. I would not be supportive for buyouts. As we discussed during the buyout legislation, there are buyouts that are abusive for sure, but there's a range of buyouts. So I would accept that restriction for the Ellis Act.
Supervisor Kim is indicating that she'd be willing to amend her motion to incorporate Ellis Act evictions.
to limit it to Ellis.
Excuse me,
Limit it, yeah.
to Ellis Act evictions.
So yeah, I appreciate that, Supervisor Wiener. So I will amend my second motion to amend to limit it to prohibit the construction of ADUs in any buildings where tenants have been displaced by Ellis Act eviction. On my first motion to amend and the third, I just want to add a few more comments because I don't think that I talked enough about why I want to prohibit ADUs from short-term rentals, although this did come up actually in two other conversations at Land Use when Supervisor Chu's legislation on in-law units came before us, and then a few months ago, Supervisor Wiener, when your Castro legislation came to us. And this is my concern about in-laws and accessory dwelling units being permitted to do short-term rentals, and that is that they often have the same address. And this is more common, I think, in other parts of the districts where you're not talking about multi-unit buildings, but it's a single-family home and then an in-law unit. I just worry that the main homeowner will use their address and say that they live there full-time, 365 days a year, and they're just doing unlimited hosted nights now in their in-law unit, and there's no tenant there, and that it will be very challenging for the planning department to be able to determine, based on the address that's brought before them, whether there's an actual tenant in the in-law unit or ADU or not. That's my concern with the legislation, and that's why I think that we should expressly state that ADUs are really for permanent tenants and not short-term rental. So my worry is that it'll just become a full-time short-term rental, given that the address is very confusing and the planning department will have a difficult time enforcing it. So that is why now for the third time I'll be introducing this amendment prohibiting ADUs from being used for short-term rentals. On the First Amendment on subdivision, I actually appreciate Supervisor Wiener's points. It's true, we did amend our condo conversion process, and so there will be a period of time where it will be very difficult to do condo conversion. But the comments that you made expressly, Supervisor Wiener, that not a lot of people are going to take advantage of this if they know they cannot condo convert, does make me worried because we are specifically passing legislation to increase the number of rental units on the market. So now we're saying that people aren't going to do it if they can only rent it, that they'll be more financially motivated if at some point they can turn it into its own condo. So that's even further why I think we should put my first motion in to prohibit subdividing these rental units to condos or fractionalized ownership, as we did with Supervisor Chu's legislation. So I still like to do each of the motions to amend. We can do them separately, 1, 2, and 3. But I just want to express why I've put forward these motions.
Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the clarification, Supervisor Kim. Just a couple of things. With the short-term rentals and the separate address, I think that is or may be true with a lot of the current illegal in-law units, so they don't have their own address. My understanding of the process where you create a housing unit, whether it's a brand new building or adding a legal ADU into an existing building, is when you go through the DBI process, you automatically receive an address. And so you can't, as I understand that, you can't create a legal dwelling unit in San Francisco without being assigned an address. And so, yes, people can always lie and cheat, and that is true in a lot of different areas of life. And someone could buy a building, just a single-family home somewhere, and say, yeah, I live there 275 days a year, when they actually don't. So that's why enforcement is so important. So I continue to think that we should treat all of our housing stock the same after having gone through several years of very challenging and complicated efforts to regulate short-term rentals. And in fact, there's a ballot measure that I believe is now qualified for November that could further restrict short-term rentals. And that, if that passes, it should apply to all dwelling units, not just some. In terms of condo conversions, I just want to be very clear. I was not suggesting that people are going to do this in order to go into the condo lottery. But I think also when people make decisions about their property, they don't do it just for themselves. They know that these buildings are going to be around for 50, 100, however many years, with subsequent owners and owners after that and owners after that. And I think people are going to be very hesitant to put permanent restrictions on their property, even if they have no intent of ever going into the condo lottery. And then finally, with the Ellis Act amendment, I do want to just give the Deputy City Attorney, Ms. Byrne, an opportunity to chime in. And I know that for other Ellis Act restrictions that we placed, there's sometimes been a number of years that we've limited, that we have, or the prohibition has remained intact for a certain number of years. And my understanding is that that is so that we do not violate the Ellis Act and allow someone to sue and overturn the legislation. So, Ms. Byrne, could you comment?
Yes, Deputy City Attorney Marlena Byrne, through the chair. I actually did want to comment on all three proposals in terms of referral back to the Planning Commission and also whether they would need another hearing here at Land Use. It's my understanding that the Planning Commission did not consider the subdivision map amendment that you're the subdivision amendment that you're proposing. So I think that would require referral back to the Planning Commission so that they could consider that and give a recommendation on it. With regard to the Ellis Act related amendment that you're proposing, that would require another hearing here at committee. We would need to provide, as this committee and the full board is aware, there have been numerous court cases on the Ellis Act and our city's ability to restrict the use of property related to the Ellis Act, and so we would need to provide some cautionary advice to the board on that. So it would need another committee hearing. I also would recommend, along the question that you were asking, that the Ellis Act amendments that have been included in board legislation have been time restricted, and that is because both to make them perspective going forward from today, I would recommend that you only include Ellis Act evictions that occur today or after, because that's when people are on notice that their Ellis Act eviction may have the added consequence of resulting in a prohibition from legalizing a dwelling, an in-law unit. It would also be important to have it be time restricted, so it would be limited to something like 5 years. And the reasoning for that is that we would want to avoid the issue of looking like we're punishing someone who's undergone the Ellis Act in the past who may not have been on notice that in the future they would be restricted from doing something like legalizing an accessory dwelling unit. The key is that you want to put people on notice that this should not be a reason for them to create an accessory dwelling unit because they think they can then Ellis Act evict. So that would be one concern there. And then in terms of the prohibition on short-term rentals, I think that would also require another committee hearing, but not referral back to the Planning Commission. I know they did have that issue raised before them at their hearing.
And Ms. Byrne, in terms of the, for example, right now, and this has been this way for maybe a decade, under our condo lottery ordinance, or the subdivision ordinance, the condo lottery, if you Ellis Act a building, you're banned from the condo lottery for a certain number of years, and I think it's a permanent ban if you Ellis Act a senior or disabled. Maybe it would make sense to replicate that provision. I'm just curious, I can't recall off the top of my head if it's 5 years or 10 years.
Deputy City Attorney Marlena Byrne, again through the chair. I'm not familiar with the exact language of that. I'm more familiar with the language that was recently proposed as amendments to the short-term rental legislation, and that had language that said if the Ellis Act eviction had occurred after the date we used there was November of 2014, because that's when that amendment would have gone into effect. But here I would recommend saying any Ellis Act eviction that's occurred after today, July, I believe it's the 20th, 2015, and 5 years thereafter, those properties would not be able to legalize an accessory dwelling unit. And something along those lines, we can come up with better language than that, certainly. But.
So that it would apply to Ellis Act evictions that where a notice was served starting today, and that the Ellis Act would once Ellis Act is triggered by the owner, then for a period of X number of years, he or she would not be able to utilize this ordinance to add an ADU. And that was 5 years in the short-term rental that both Supervisor Campos and Supervisor Farrell proposed.
Yes.
Okay.
It was 5 years? It was 5 years in both of those legislations.
And my recollection of the condo lottery is that I think 5 years, maybe 10 years for the length of the ban if you've done an LSAT. And I thought it was permanent if it was a senior or disabled who was evicted under the LSAT, but I just can't recall with certainty.
All right, thank you very much. Seeing next would be Supervisor Christensen.
Thank you. I certainly appreciate the concerns. As I said, I think anything we do deserves a lot of scrutiny. But what I hear, Supervisor Kim, is that some of what you're concerned about is currently covered by restrictions, such as short-term rentals. Some of it is not an immediate issue. It's in the case of the condo conversions. And so my hope is that we can sort of move ahead to address these immediate issues. I think we're about to hear an item after this one in which restrictions were passed years ago to respond to a particular condition. The guidelines that were passed, the changes to the building code, were extremely narrow, extremely rigid, difficult to change. And what happened is the circumstances changed, but the regulations didn't. And so we landed up with restrictions that boxed us in from reasonable change as conditions changed over time. And I think that's something in this case. I mean, we're at a very interesting juncture as a city right now. We're all looking at where are we going to be in 5, 10, 15 years. I'd like to make sure while this is reasonably prescriptive in terms of how it would be enforced, that we leave enough room to accommodate changes that are likely to come. And I think some of the things that we're most worried about, as I said, are either already covered legally or are probably not likely to happen. One thing, Supervisor Kim, that you and I share is that I think our districts probably have the greatest difference in dwelling units maybe than any of the other districts in the city. And where I have a lot of small cottages, we've also got high-rises. As we looked at this legislation, we talked to property owners, talked to the planning department. The assumption is that most of these changes are likely to occur in the corridors where there are large buildings. So Post, Sutter, Stockton, Pine, Bush, these sort of areas. And, the Telegraph Hill, for example, the residential units there are less likely to be affected, probably. And so we've generally tried to focus on making sure this works for our larger apartment buildings where we feel in the district it's most likely to occur. And in that case, I think concerns about addresses and about the use of units are probably less significant than they might be, let's say, if this was applied to some of the western neighborhoods, for example.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Kim.
I just want to appreciate those comments, and I also don't want to treat certain types of tenants differently from others, which is why, I didn't support the RPP amendment, because I don't, how do we differentiate who is eligible for parking permits? My concern with ADUs was specifically around the ability for homeowners or property owners to game the system with addresses. I'd love to hear more about that over the week. Maybe Department of Building Inspection or someone can walk me through how accessory dwelling units will get assigned an address and how planning could enforce in that arena. I'd love to hear more about that. I think in the meantime, though, what I'd suggest, I still want to keep that amendment on. With amendment number 2, though, on Ellis Act eviction, my suggestion would be that we prohibit the construction of ADU in any buildings where tenants have been displaced by the Ellis Act in the last 10 years. I'm sorry, for 10 years, not for 5. And for now, I would like to keep the retroactivity because it's a broader amendment. If we, over the week, we decide that that's not legally permissible or it's questionable whether we can do, I think next Monday we can bring it back, as Ms. Burns has suggested. But I don't agree with that interpretation. I think that we can be retroactive. I think that we can go up to 10 years, and I believe that we have done that already. So I'd like that time. So my motion, how I'll make my motion now for the second piece is prohibiting the construction of ADUs in any buildings where tenants have been displaced by the Ellis Act for 10 years.
Okay,
And
let's go motion by motion.
Okay,
We'll start
let's go
with
motion by motion.
that as a first motion. Okay, so you have heard the motion made by Supervisor Kim. Is there any further discussion, Supervisor Weiner?
Yeah, can I just inquire, is it if the eviction has occurred within 10 years of when the ADU is being applied for, or I'm just not sure what the 10 years is?
So that you can't, you cannot construct an ADU for 10 years.
After an Ellis Act eviction?
After an Ellis Act eviction.
Okay. And I would support that restriction. In terms of the retroactivity, I assume between now, over the next few days, we can get advice from the city attorney, because my understanding is that we typically have not made it retroactive, including legislation sponsored by Supervisor Peskin, Supervisor Daley, and other people as well, who are clearly no friend to the Ellis Act. And so I think there's a legal reason for that, and I do want to make sure that we have legislation that's going to hold up in court. And so to the Deputy City Attorney, we will be getting legal advice on that.
Deputy City Attorney Marlena Byrne, through the chair, yes, you will be getting legal advice from our office on that. The reason for making it prospective rather than retroactive is so that it is not punitive on people who may not have known that this restriction would have been placed on them if they Ellis Acted their unit.
And through the chair, I believe there's legislation where we have imposed it retroactively, but during the week we'll have time to explore that.
Okay, so there's a motion that's been made. Let's see, without objection, this motion passes. All right. Supervisor Kim, could you make your second
Sure.
motion?
My second motion is actually just literally lifting this provision from Supervisor Chu's, which is to prohibit ADUs or requiring ADUs to be permanently maintained as rental units and restricting the conversion of units to ownership for individual sale.
All right, is there any final discussion on this item?
So that amendment is a little different than what I heard before. I had understood the amendment to be a ban on entering the condo lottery. But so through the chair, Supervisor Kim, is the amendment also to say that an owner cannot reside in one of these ADUs, it has to be rented?
No, I'm sorry. It's a conversion of units to ownership. I see what you're saying. So if the owner decides to move in, they'll be owning the unit. So I'll clarify that. You're right. That's not my intent. It's to prohibit condo conversion or fractional ownership. So a separate owner.
Right. Okay. And so for the reasons I stated before, I won't be supporting this amendment. I just don't think it's a good idea, again, to take one class of buildings and say we're going to treat it differently than every other building. And even though we've dramatically scaled back the condo lottery, once it comes back to life in 6 or 8 years or whenever the 10 years expires, we're going to treat one class of building differently, and we're going to tell owners that in addition to all the hurdles you have to overcome and the money you have to pay to build an ADU, which we want you to do, we're then going to permanently ban this building until the end of time from the condo lottery. I don't think it's the right direction, so I'll be voting against this.
I'm going to be voting for this amendment, and I'm actually probably of a different mindset than you, Supervisor Weiner. I do believe that all of the housing stock is not the same. I don't think that we should be treating each and every rental unit, RH1, RH1D, RH2, housing equally. They're different. They have different zoning designations. They have different restrictions on them. And so I will be supporting this motion as it goes forward.
And to the Deputy City Attorney, this will cause both pieces of legislation to be re-referred back to the Planning Commission. Am I correct about that?
Yes, it's my understanding that the Planning Commission did not consider this amendment when it was before them, I believe, last week.
Yeah. And so my request then to Supervisor Cohen is, or to the maker, is that this could be introduced as trailing legislation so that this does not get re-referred back to the Planning Commission. It's one thing to have a continuance and another hearing at the board, but to take this away from the board now back to the Planning Commission and basically to restart the process from scratch, I would ask that we not go down that route.
So I actually don't have a problem supporting it as trailing legislation, so I'll put it to the maker.
Yeah, dividing the file or duplicating the file and sending an amended version back to Planning Department on this motion.
Deputy City Attorney Marlena Byrne, it could be done that way. You could introduce separate legislation that would trail.
I'd like to duplicate the file and amend one and send it back to planning.
It's my understanding the committee can do that.
Yes, we can do that. Okay, so then let's take a vote on, just, Mr. Clerk, as a point of clarification, do we take the vote first on duplication the file first and then the motion?
There's no need to take a vote on duplication. That can happen
within the motion.
with
within
the request.
The motion. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. All right. So I think we're all clear on what the motion is before us. Let's do a roll call vote on the second motion proposed by Supervisor Kim.
And point of information: this is for the motion to amend to ban from the condo letter on the duplicated version, not on the primary version.
That is correct.
That's correct.
Did you get that, Mr. Clerk?
The original version, without the amendment number 1, will be duplicated, and then we will propose an amendment number 2 to that duplicated file, and we're going to take a vote on that at this time.
That is correct. Okay, roll call vote, please.
On the motion on the amendment number 2, Member Wiener?
No.
Wiener, no. Member Kim?
Aye.
Kim, aye. Chair Cohen?
Aye.
Cohen, aye. The motion passes.
Okay, thank you. This motion passes. The file has been duplicated. One version will go back to the Planning Commission. The other one will continue to move forward. Could you please call, Supervisor Kim, could you introduce motion number 3?
So my final motion to amend is to add a provision prohibiting accessory dwelling units from being used for short-term rentals.
Is there any further discussion on this? Okay. Let's call a roll call vote on this.
On amendment number 3, on that motion, Member Wiener?
No.
Wiener, no. Member Kim?
Aye.
Kim, aye. Chair Cohen?
Aye.
Cohen, aye. The
Thank
motion
you.
passes.
Right, the motion passes.
And I'm sorry, was that on that was on both versions? Because that does not have to go back to the Planning Commission. Is that correct?
My understanding, it was on the original version. With amendment number 1 that has already occurred to it, we're going to apply amendment number 3 to that one also.
Okay. Ms. Byrne, could you answer Supervisor Wiener's question?
That does not have to go back to planning,
That is
correct?
correct. The Planning Commission had that raised at their hearing multiple times.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay. All right. Mr. Clerk, could you please call item number 7, please?
Actually, Madam Chair, we have to act on the other underlying item.
I'm sorry, say it again?
We have to act on this item. To the Deputy City Attorney, do these 2 amendments that were made require a continuance of the Land Use Committee?
Deputy City Attorney Marlena Byrne, through the chair, yes. The amendments that were made regarding the Ellis Act and short-term rentals do require another hearing here.
Okay. So then I make a motion to continue items 5 and 6 1 week.
All right. Motion made without objection.
Or excuse me, item 5 and 6, the unduplicated version, or the original versions by 1 week.
All right. Motion made to table for 1 week.
Continue
items 5 and 6. Thank you. This motion passes.
And on the duplicated version?
I'll make a motion to refer to the Planning Commission.
The duplicated version will be?
We refer to the Planning Commission.
We refer to planning.
All right. Without objection, these motions pass.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Clerk, could you please call item number 7?
Item number 7. File number 150681, ordinance amending the planning code to allow an existing restaurant and/or bar in the North Beach Special Use District to open a second location in the district with a conditional use authorization provided that it meets certain criteria, and affirming the Planning Department's California Environmental Quality Act determination and making findings of consistency with the general plan.
Thank you. Supervisor Christensen is the author of this item. Supervisor Christensen, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So this is one of those restrictive situations that we talked about. We have a large, prominent location in North Beach that has been vacant for 11 years. It's been determined that one of the reasons are some of the use restrictions that have been placed on it. We think about changing those cautiously, but in this case, we've decided that the best thing to do is to amend those. We've discussed various ways to go about that, and we have proposed and have gotten the agreement of the Planning Commission to address this lot separately. We've got a beloved neighborhood use, our local Mama's Restaurant, that's proposing to use the space and to create a second restaurant and a specialty takeout location there. We're very excited about it. We've received overwhelming support from the neighborhood, lots of indications that the neighborhood and that other merchants welcome this. The site has been somewhat of a blight, unlit, and not having somebody around it all the time. And so I think everybody's excited about having it in an active use again, in the hopes that that will bring increased business traffic to the surrounding businesses. This was heard by the Small Business Commission and unanimously approved. They did, however, make a couple of recommendations, which I'm happy to include. And if I can ask Supervisor Wiener's assistance in this, they had suggested that we strike bar from restaurant and bar so that it can only be used as a restaurant. And we have a provision that a continuous business would be allowed to occupy this space, and they asked that we change that from a business in continuous operation from 1 year to at least 5 years. And so if the committee would accept those recommendations, then I would put this forth for your approval.
Sure. Okay, thank you very much. Supervisor Christensen has made some amendments that she's put forward. Before we take a vote on this, we're going to take public comment on this item. Please, members of the public, please come up for public comment.
Hi, my name is Kevin Guy with planning staff, actually. If I could have the overhead, please.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize there was a staff presentation on this item.
I'll be quite brief. Supervisor Christensen addressed many of the points that I would have raised. So just by way of orientation here, this is a map of the various special use districts that apply in the North Beach area. The North Beach Special Use District, that is the subject of our discussion today, is outlined in the black and yellow, kind of a regular line that I'll trace here. So as you can see, it runs primarily along the Columbus Avenue and Grant Avenue frontages within North Beach, along the commercial properties. So as indicated, this would be an amendment to the North Beach SUD regulations, which would currently prohibit any new restaurant or bar from going into a space that was previously occupied by a, quote, basic neighborhood sale or service. That is the case at the location proposed for the second Mama's Restaurant at 627 Vallejo Street, but it would apply more broadly to other properties in the SUD, provided that they meet certain criteria. So as amended, this could only be, noted by Supervisor Christensen, the existing restaurant or bar, or the existing restaurant would have to operate within the neighborhood for at least 5 of the last 5 years. The proposed location for a second operation would have to be a ground level, measure at least 5,000 square feet, and have to be vacant for more than 15 months. At least 40% of that space would have to be set aside for non-restaurant kind of neighborhood serving commercial uses, which meet the basic neighborhood sale or service intent. And the proposal must be consistent with the general plan, priority policies of the planning code, and provide a substantial net benefit to the neighborhood. So all of these criteria, if this legislation is adopted, would be considered through conditional use authorization for individual users that might come forward to take advantage of this. And that CU would be considered by the Planning Commission. So in terms of the legislation itself, on June 4th, the Planning Commission did recommend approval of the amendment and approve the conditional use for the proposed second location of Mama's Restaurant at 627 Vallejo Street. And as noted by the supervisor, of course, the Small Business Commission recommended certain amendments at their July 13th hearing. So this does conclude my presentation, but I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, you're here for public comment?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you.
My name's Vince Sanchez, and I'm part of the family
who has operated Mama's on Washington Square. It was our parents, Michael and Francis Mama Sanchez. They've been in business since 1951 on the corner of Filbert and Stockton. We've been a part of the North Beach community for some 64 years. It's a very popular restaurant. They line up daily, some 2.5 hours, and it was the lines that was sort of the impetus for taking a look at 627 when Small Business Commissioner Kathleen Dooley brought this to our attention. 627 fits our plans perfectly, and we understood that there was always some concern in the neighborhood by a few people. We listened to everybody. I think we've come up with the concept. Little Mama's, the specialty grocery, I think is very unique to the area, and in listening to the concerns and to the overwhelming supporters from the get-go, it became apparent quickly that had we not had this support right from the beginning, we would have stepped away from this. We're going on 33 months now. We valued our time and certainly the money that we've expended on the project. As I said, the concept is unique, and 627, as the code reads, would just never be, it would never be rented again. It is not said, it is not feasible for grocery stores, it's not feasible for hardware stores. It's a building that time has changed in part because of technology and such. There's a ton of competition in the area, 2 Walgreens, 2 Safeways, a Trader Joe's, and smaller markets. Mama's is the right place, Little Mama's is the right place at this time. Thank you.
My name is Nick Sanchez. I'm a member of the 3rd generation to be involved with the Mamas. Like the overwhelming population in North Beach, I too agree this project has merit and benefits to the community. My cousins and I plan to be an active part of North Beach, with key motivation to carry on the legacy which began with our grandparents and is continued with my Uncle Mike and Aunt Debbie. Mama's and Little Mama's Community Market will be business known for its food and enthusiasm we are serving to our guests, and has benefits to the North Beach neighborhood. We do so with a touch of crazy fun, so I ask you please join us and the rest of the city committee members who have recommended passing this proposal. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Kathleen Dooley, North Beach Business Association. Our association is here to support this legislation. We think it's a great use of difficult-to-fill space. As mentioned before, on the Small Business Commission, we recommended striking bar as part of if it becomes vacant, so that I'm sure we can all agree we have enough bars in North Beach. And if a restaurant wants to go in, they can get an alcohol permit for that. The other was the change to make at least 5 years that a business would have to have been in operation in North Beach, because, as we all know, restaurants fail very easily. We want to just make sure it's like Mama's, a classic business. The last thing that I didn't have a chance to review at the commission, but I'm going to mention it for the merchants, is 40% of the space, if it's vacant, needs to be held by neighborhood serving business. Unfortunately, we reviewed that and saw that a liquor store would qualify for that. So we're asking for a liquor store to be specifically prohibited from this legislation. And then my final note is, Supervisor Wiener, you were very presumptuous and rude to say that things that involve our district are politically motivated. This is our home, and we are allowed to speak, and it is not politically motivated.
Hi, good afternoon, supervisors. I just want to share, as a concerned citizen here, that it's been several years now that building in North Beach has been empty. And now you have an opportunity to make change in the area, a positive change to bring life back in the district. And I'm here spending the last 4 hours to make sure to say this, and I support Mamas to move in to that second location.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Ron Lee. I'm a resident of San Francisco all my life, and I grew up in North Beach. And you know, it's just refreshing to know that Mama's is going to go into that space that's been empty for so many years. So you know, I'm here in favor that you support and pass this. The tourists, the neighborhoods, the people of San Francisco really wants Mama. That's why the line is over an hour long, 2 hours long, waiting to have breakfast. Yeah, on the corner of Filbert and Stockton. So I really hope that you can support this. It'll make that corner lively again. It's been so dead, and it's just a waste of space. And it's really going to bring a lot of energy into North Beach, and it's going to be good for everybody, and it's good for a tax base of San Francisco, so we create more programs to help whatever San Francisco needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Sandy Su. The location has been empty and wasted for more than 9 years. Please approve Mama's to create more jobs. It is good for the community and it's good for the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, I'm here again for Telegraph Hill dwellers. My name is Paul Weber, and I'm supporting the passage of this legislation with the amendments proposed by Ms. Dooley. Those seem to be reasonable given the nature of the number of bars in North Beach now, and we hope you'll pass it with those modifications. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeremy Blattis, and I was the broker representing 627 Vallejo in this transaction. My family started the first real estate firm to specialize in retail leasing, so over 90 years old. I'm not 90, but our company is. And this property it's incomprehensible how long this property has been vacant for. We continue to have the property on our website. We've had a number of strip clubs, tanning salons, things like this, uses that would not work clearly for North Beach. This is a local family, and I find it astounding that it's taken this long for this process to go through. This is a family that's been around a long time. It's built an enormous amount of goodwill, and I think the supervisors should ask themselves why they've harmed the ability for a small business to expand. They have the support of the community, and it's just too restrictive. Furthermore, I also think that it's bad that they're not allowed to serve alcohol. Their competitors would be serving alcohol. It would be harmful to allow some businesses to serve alcohol and not new ones. And I don't think we could ask for a better tenant for the area and for the city. Thank you.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Stefano Costellato. I'm registered as a lobbyist in San Francisco. I'm here on a pro bono basis simply because as I sip my cappuccino every day in the afternoon and look at that 627 Vallejo building, I ask myself, there is no excuse why this prominent space has been vacant in its past, in its present, or nor does it need to be vacant in the future. And I do applaud Supervisor Christensen for taking the initiative to come up with a legislative amendment which acts as a bridge, which will allow something that the community has completely endorsed, both as necessary, desirable, and conducive to the area. This legislation is going to provide connectivity so that it will bring about 500 people a day to come to Mama's, come to Little Mama's, and maybe, just maybe, some of those folks will want to walk around the neighborhood and purchase something in some of the retail stores that we have. And this is during lunch, breakfast and lunchtime when we really need the foot traffic. Another thing is, for my own selfish reasons, I don't like to wait an hour and a half to get into any place. And because of the popularity of Mama's and their success, it's warranted expansion into a new space. And what better thing to have than to have someone who we know, endear, with a good track record want that space. So it's long overdue. And once again, I applaud the supervisor for taking the initiative. the community is going to be very happy with the results.
Seeing that there's no more public comment is closed. Supervisor Christensen has made an amendment to the legislation. Could you Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. You're absolutely right. Supervisor Wiener, could you please make a motion? Supervisor Wiener's motion to, all right, let me see here. Supervisor Wiener has made a motion to
exclude bars.
Exclude bars.
And to change the definition of the continuous operation from 1 year to 5 years. The definition of continuous operation would be changed from...
Change definition of continuation from 1 to 5 years, and that motion was seconded by Supervisor Kim. Without objection, this motion passes as amended. Thank you. All right. Madam Clerk, could we go into a 5-minute recess?
On the item to amend, you'd also like to recommend it to the board as a committee report?
I'd like to recommend it to the board, from the board.
As amended.
As a committee report, as amended. Thank you. I'd like to go into recess for 5 minutes.
SF Gov TV, San Francisco Government Television.
Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, could you please call item number 8, please?
Yes, item number 8 is a motion ordering submitting to the voters an ordinance amending the administrative code to update the surplus city property.
All right, so colleagues, I don't think we're going to be able to get to this item this evening given the committee member schedules. I'd like to make a motion that we recess this item, the item number 8, only to be heard at 1 p.m. on Wednesday, July 22nd. Before we vote on the motion to recess on Wednesday, 1 p.m., we will have to take public comment. Are there any members of the public that would like to comment on item number 8? Please.
Madam Chair, Supervisor Kim, Supervisor Wiener, I'm Chris Bowman. I spoke at the last hearing on the other file, on the duplicate file. I've gone through both files and believe that there's a need to merge both documents into one piece of legislation. You do not have findings or purpose in the legislation that is currently before you. And additionally, if you go back to the legislative history of the surplus property measure, it was passed 8-0 13 years ago. It was not signed by the mayor at the time. It's based on data in the findings that's 15 years old, and it's really not germane to what the housing needs are of the city based on what you received from the Office of Economic and Workforce Development, which said that only 19% of the needs of middle-income residents are being met of the projected 7-year need, versus 48% for low income, below 80% of the average median income. So I have copies of the handwritten edits, which I'd be glad to give you, and I hope that you'll have a chance to review them in the next 2 days. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Are there any other members of the public that'd like to comment on item 8?
Patrick Manetza, I oppose you postponing this for, 1 week?
Yes, 1 week. No, I'm sorry, till Wednesday, 2 days, Wednesday, 1 p.m.
Will that still give you time to get it on the November ballot?
Yes.
Okay, then in that case, I'm going to support the motion, although you won't see me on Wednesday.
Okay.
All right. I think it's a good idea to set aside surplus property for affordable housing. I haven't read your background file. I'll be interested to see what the criteria is being expanded. Thank you.
Right, okay, for that one item.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public? All right, seeing none, this item, public comment is closed.
You can.
Supervisor Rayner?
So, Madam Chair, the request is to recess the meeting just for this item until Wednesday at 1 o'clock.
That is correct, sir.
And that is due to Supervisor Kim's travel schedule?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
And the ongoing conversations around item number 8.
And so this courtesy will be extended to all committee members in terms of committee members having hard stops, which does happen from time to time?
That is correct.
Okay.
We have a few more pieces of business to take care of. We need to take public comment on items number 10, 9, and 10. Could you please call items 10, 9, and 10 together?
Would you like to take a motion to recess the item then to Wednesday?
Yes, I would like to take a motion to recess item number 8 until Wednesday. A motion.
I'll make the motion to recess this item to Wednesday at 1 o'clock.
Thank you. And this item passes without objection. Okay. Could you please call items 9 and 10 together?
Yes. Item number 9 is a resolution receiving and approving the first biannual housing report for fiscal year 2014-2015. And item number 10 is a hearing to present findings from the inaugural housing report.
Thank you very much. The sponsor of this legislation has asked for it to be continued for 1 week. Could you give me that date? Could you get the date for the record?
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm sorry. I didn't hear you. So 1 week from today would be July 27th.
Thank you. So there's a motion made to hear this item, July 22nd? 27th. Let's take public comment on items 8, 9, and 10, please.
Rats. You're going to make me run through more vacation hours, aren't you? Okay, so whether I make it here next week or not, I'll have to see. The cumulative housing balance reported was just 21%. Rather than Prop K last November, that was merely a declaration of policy, Supervisor Kim should have placed on last November's ballot her original measure for the 33%, so that we would not now be hearing the bad news that the cumulative housing balance is 21%, and the projected housing balance citywide has dropped to a paltry 11%. It's not anywhere near the 33% target. My recollection is that when the housing balance does not reach the 33% threshold, that MOHCD is required to develop and present a proposal on how the city will fund additional affordable housing to reach that 33% threshold. Why isn't MOHCD here today with that proposal in their hand, already written? When will a hearing be scheduled to hear MOHCD's funding plan? As I testified earlier today, we desperately need a city charter change to create a board or commission over all of MOHCD. If you can get that done before the deadline and put it on this November's ballot, MOHCD should not.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. We're not able to get that changed this cycle. Thank you. Your time is up. Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that would like to comment on items 9 and 10?
Hello, my name is Wendy, and what I want to speak to is in my neighborhood on the corner of Pine and Larkin, there's affordable housing built on top of a post office. I took that example and I was thinking, there are other city properties, whether fire stations, police stations, school properties, for example, where housing can also be built on top of. I would just like that to be considered. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Seeing no other members of the public here to comment on 9 and 10, public comment is closed. Thank you very much. Supervisor Weiner.
So I will then, so we're going to then continue items
9 and 10 until July 27th.
Okay, so I'll make a motion to continue items 9 and 10 until July 27th.
All right, thank you. Without objection, this motion passes.
And I move that we go into recess until this coming Wednesday at 1 o'clock or 1:30?
1 o'clock.
So
on July 22nd.
Okay, so 1 o'clock on July 22nd.
All right, without objection, this motion passes. Thank you. Madam Clerk, is there any other business before this body?
There's no further business.
Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.